Franklin D. Roosevelt's administration was both aware of capitalism's potential to increase the American quality of life, but also its potential to cannibalize itself. And it is truly remarkable to me that nearly 100 years ago, they saw the exact same mechanism that's playing out today. And this was at a time when some of your baseball watching and apple pie eating Americans were still on the fence about communism, and they had solid representation via the CPUSA. A lot of American citizens believed that the Soviet New Deal took about sticking to the whole freedom thing and redefining all these problems. Serious. Example, JP Morgan's Corporation. You see, this guaranteed that if you had money in a commercial bank and that bank business, a whole lot more quickly progress. Most groups will be up somewhere in the woods and decide or allied nations met in and 80% foreign banks. Then dollar, which is normally if a country about the US, while watching America, the other nations borrow money for. Auction to make massive amounts of US dollars for American gold. 66 carrying back 300 tons of gold, nearly half of it, and spending the American government now a frequent public parody. Any other large work. I have the parallels between Roosevelt and the announced
Now!
You are among the overwhelming. Your dollar will be worth just as much.
Session OPEC, or the Organization of Petroleum.
Why are you taking such a hard on Chad? Like, dude's an ass, I get it. But, like, one video is enough. You don't need 5. Like, come on, dude. You made your point. You ripped them to shreds. You don't need to keep beating a dead horse at that point. Just let it go. Viva la Dirt League!
Yeah, sure.
So it needs 128 gigabytes.
Sounds like me.
What I can do.
Okay, great, because I've been all over town.
Hey, you're lucky too.
My big curious is if you're gonna go all that hard on it that you're getting 128 gigs of RAM. Why are you getting an i9? Why are you not getting a server CPU?
Colors. Okay. We have space gray, midnight blue, highlight rose. We have horizon bronze. Colors we have in stock. Can you see if you can? Yeah, yeah. We can get moonstone blue. Off white. Do you have anything that's like gray? There's no space gray. Oh, you might like Thunderbird gray. Freshly poured gray. No, haunted gray. All gray? Gray. Agree. Gray? No. On it. Someone who doesn't identify with the color gray? US gray? No idea. Hmm. Oh, sorry. Limited selection. Limited. Like take down 10. So I'm getting to my. While I acknowledge, however, over a wide array.
VGA! I love VGA so much more than you. VGA is so much better than you.
My lows here, but even the first notes of the score get my little. Not Star Trek, but it is. Well, they own all the. Obviously, each character has a Trek counterpart, while the show itself was meant as a character feels joy out of all some occasional phobic stretching. Tawny also has a low belly button. Gwen isn't playing the communications officer or of the computer. Barrett Roddenberry is not when she was Apple or Waxana. I swear, man, Heath Flank is basically deaf. And yes, you should brush up. Names of the actors.
Holy shit, that's Sigourney Weaver? I didn't know that! Holy shit! Why did I not know that? I know Alan Rickman and I know Sonny Shalhoub and Tim Allen. I don't know who these other two people are by name.
As well as
I'm pretty sure he was in Idiocracy. He was the lawyer. And that's Monk.
Ironically, Tony Shalhoub is Lebanese, which is technically Asian, but on, even though that's really his name. Character's name. This is right on the nudge to the next huge cliffhanger for the next season, and compromises the entire way joke that shadow. Almost as shocking as in one shot. He is always a by Kurt. Look at me! Primarily both Leonard Nimoy and Spock. Nimoy even titled his autobiography, I Am Not Spock, but not really a real Tuvix or a warp.
TV guide about my boobs and how they fit into my suit.
To this day, but are gonna go on the adventure.
Still can't believe that's Sigourney Weaver. It doesn't even look like her.
As if you had reached adventures.
Also, she's not playing a badass bitch in this one, so.
With the original. Alexander, wait! Grab it! Grab it! Already walking across hastily. In the mirror, talking and joking. Almost enthusiastic. Galaxy Quest. We'll go out there. You say. First he cares about the only reason he cares about on stage. The awkward stage. He keeps saying he won't say behind him. I also see a guy who loves his job. Commander, huh? I'll remember what happened. Good guy, kid pretending it's teaching him a lesson about teamwork or something. They do not.
I see it now! I see Sigourney now! I can't believe I didn't see it for years! Holy shit! I fucking loved this movie growing up! Why did I not see it? I knew who Sigourney Weaver was! It's because she's not playing a bad bitch in this. That's the only explanation I have.
All that keeps the fans what they want, engages with them. My understanding is no clue what you're talking about. All the names of
Pretty sure this came out after Aliens, right?
well, we've seen them all dozens of times. It was just the one that
Did you?
Alien was 79.
Commander and I never had.
the
Aliens.
only one who hoped for a happy ever after.
86.
Pardon, make sure there's a little.
Oh, wow, 1990.
These three are whatever.
What?
Ironically, made them straight.
Fucking 16 years later after Aliens.
Here's a joke.
I thought this was 80s.
What's also interesting about it, like him, a few negative comments always have a bigger impact on positive ones. Show me how I
Like, this is like Labyrinth level of. Heck, and that was 85? 86. Come on.
Okay. Justin Long often enough. He was destined in this role. That's what I'm talking about. 10 years ago, I would have yelled at rocks, but you know, some people say typically parity between Jason and Alex. Yeah, pretty accurate. Especially really lands home. So upset at him for being kind of missed the boat on money from Star runs than a lot. He's so self-involved that he actually the reruns. Grasp on them.
Give. Give. I'll throw it. Give. No. Hand.
Full of memorable
Hand it to me.
voices. Even most
No.
and
Give me the ducky. I'll throw it.
the one who came up with most
Give me ducky. I'll throw it.
violence. It's crazy how well Dwight fits in with the but he was too busy, so he could go get Coke again. Dog.
If
I understand.
Yeah.
what you're saying.
Aggressively picked whilst
Yes, we're all
close,
out there.
so close.
Wandering the tracks the Lily are
You're getting
continually
it.
redirecting
You're
while
getting it.
trying to
You're
catch
getting
up
it.
to speed on the Grizzly.
Yes.
And the third
Almost had it.
specifically fixed
Ah, no.
since it seemed like Commander
Yes.
Grizzly would be most
Give. Good girl.
purely green.
Give.
Ship is so Star Trek
Your
as
turn,
well.
Give.
Fantastic
Come here.
balance will cause it seems. What?
Okay, I'll just let you have your mournful abominations. Your mournful house.
Some of the CGI.
What are you fucking doing? Weirdo. You weirdo.
I grab those.
You weirdo.
What a save.
Over my head. Nice work. They're taking Timu Radio the money. Good for her for not taking it. Roswell's fun. Audience know what the third doing Muppets with money with the spec. What's the grand Maybe it's in out. It's a perfect scene. Gwen flinch with laughableness. Would be something nice. Fantasy. It is sort of surprising that it'd be fun to see the actors honored as who are technically you've been watching the historical doc. We need more films with this concept. The only ones I can think of. Aspect of our society. You guys like to see and continuing beyond just being in space. There's a chance to negotiate this case surrender. One flaw is that always know my that changed now. Other means of adapting human forms better than others. Continuing on, must be a wink at the Enterprise holding 1,000 personnel, but mainly see the fan, and obviously uniform definitely uniform. It doesn't match the crew as clearly production. You wouldn't have been allowed to keep engineering department color humans B, and the zipper is totally different. To design those controls, you even though Jason was the first to experience that it's all real, it clearly hasn't hit him yet. He's enjoying the idea of having no consequences. Crew were realizing this moment. Trying to pull the ship away from the wall. Right out and say it. Really flipping the ship worship. All on the same page. 4.5 minutes and everything. I think they're done. It's gonna be long. Korean clap is like a little nod to God. So much for other food acting. Why don't you just turn Chris has the dope. I think Jason's plan wasn't first.
Ugly commander.
By literal homicidal anthropology, while not real.
You gave me the word with you. I know where the whole
Difference between they are and pretending they are. The real thing now. Easy.
Generators.
Nice thing about watching movies for the first time when you're younger is it's really obvious. You just kind of over it at first and why he's so mellow. Always in the design of the skeleton, these basic bug looking accents. They're clearly insectoid. Anyone ever feel like the reptilian splitting the Baju Grey? Clear, and he's still instincts. Are paid in different ways. Historical documents.
Can it be repaired?
repaired.
Brilliant sphere, irreparable.
So oddly present. Listening to you until you.
So that is.
Look, I one job on this lousy ship. I'm gonna do it. Okay?
You don't need to feel valuable, right? But also, I'd like to point out that I haven't made. And Ripley are. Was booze, but even the movie inside the movie, Sigourney invented herself.
You don't think Gilligan's Island?
Look, you see, come much funnier because of how upset they. I've only recent feelings with, but it makes it more brilliant. It's like an evolutionary nightmare. Bugs. Thermian laugh is like group hug. Group hugging. Look, I never watched one. He's been under. He's one of the funniest people alive. Show about comedian. He's part of the marvelous Mrs. He's always the first to do the salute. He was even continuing earlier. Eating cracker sticks with cheese.
I have a lot.
I remember thinking he was correct.
Is there air? You don't know. The only rational person on the thing.
Place in Utah called Goblin. They even said space. Oh, that makeup is actually fucking. He's wearing makeup. He's even wearing it in his apartment. Shut up.
Sure. 3 years old. Mine is not. They're gonna get me. They're gonna get ugly someday. I need more.
Also, they're called demons in the script in that career. Of the show they feed. He knows how bad it can.
All right. Listen up. Here's the plan. Negative sphere. Like you said, improvement. You're looking for.
Aw, Jason, this guy. He's not gonna. Get people here.
Oh, hell.
45. Rolled. Most of the sentient annoying because getting a bunch of blue demons wasn't. Lots of gross pig.
Oh.
Hey, hold please.
The operation. Movements are all vibes. Moment, but also a nice reminder that Armenians don't understand life. They all want to keep it from even more excellent delivery.
Construct a weapon. Look around. Some sort of rudiment.
I don't know if it's the root. Rockwell is perfect. I doesn't know. Jim Allen recipe. Love Bush. So, family, friends? No, that. Here, which is honest. It was a serious drama about. Timo, you wish to. None of the characters. Experiences.
You have owned a greater damage.
The show. And human history is packed. It doesn't matter if our. Loves that. Yeah. Ended. Here's why I would record it third. So that's honesty. All of them. The entire scene is so hard. Open my throat. Honestly, I've been rocked growing up. I like the dudes. This is best for.
Yeah.
Play.
Lathe?
I think
You guys
it's
called
only
something
one
up.
with that.
Starting to act like you did in episode 17. You seen stealing hack.
Oh, right.
Untouchable response. Alan Rickman was also underutilized in comedy. The love when great actors pretend to be acting. Guy is an interesting guy. Now they're acting more like a crew, but it's because Jason referenced something they actually did together. They both understand what the next move is without ever explicitly saying it because they did work together for a long time. They really are friends.
Used to pull your punches.
It was seen stealing hack.
And right back at it.
The door's a little sticky. Did you see that? I'll get one of my boys up here to can of WD-40.
Reminds me of the time Costello shoots someone and then says, she fell funny. And Fred really belongs in space.
Take time, Molly. You find that valve shut off before those thermals run out of air. Good practice driving.
I love that they questioned him the first few times he took charge, but he actually is good at delegating, and man, someone's got to do it.
Listen to me. This is Jason Nesbitt. Commander Peter Quincy Taggart, SEA Protector. We accidentally traded boxes the other day when we bumped into.
Oh, Commander, I see. Okay.
That okay is pitch perfect. And bringing Brandon in is possibly the best decision of the entire movie. Not only does it redeem Jason and is totally an unexpected callback, it also elevates the thing about Brandon that Jason loved, his nerdy knowledge of Galaxy Quest. Brandon's supposed weakness becomes his strength, and that is the type of hero's journey we love at CinemaWins Global Incorporated United Technologies Corp. TMCR.
I'm not a complete brain case, okay? I understand completely that it's just a TV show. Ship.
It's all real.
I knew it! I knew it!
Second best moment of the movie. He doesn't hesitate for a sec. This is what so many of us wanted when we were kids. Shoot, I'm still hoping this happens. Brandon has a Rainmeter type customization thing in Galaxy Quest style. He probably coded himself, which is amazing, but Brandon, buddy, no one is getting fooled by weird stuff. Spin! Guy finally finding his purpose. Look, I never really had an inclination to put bosoms resting boobily on my wall as a teen. I had Kobe Jones and Carlos Valderrama cutouts for Euros, of course, but whose parents were letting them do this in the 90s? If movies like Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead are to be believed, it was a lot of mothers. It's an incredible design, but I do find it genuinely unnerving when Saris's things go up.
There will be a slight drop.
Fun line, but this is also the scene where they start the meta bit, where Gwen's clothes slowly start to rip off because reasons.
Spinning sand, and we have in every single.
Alright, that's cool.
Why 13 seconds? That's really not enough time to do anything of any importance.
Time to redeem a single mistake.
For a guy who specifically didn't attempt to model Taggart or Nesmith after Captain Kirk, he's really starting to capture some of his best qualities.
Maybe you're the plucky comic relief. Ever think about that?
Plucky? I mean, he is, but only because Tony Shalhoub's comedic genius is too powerful to ever be called plucky. Not a bad reminder that we don't always have to be the person we think others want us to be. Thanks, Fred.
Are you stoned?
Apparently, yes.
Wow, gross!
A yippee-ki-yay Mr. Falcon moment in the final cut of the film because it was planned to be rated R and had lots of profanity. And supposedly Sigourney Weaver tried to make her dub even more obvious and bad in protest of the studio changing the film.
Unbelievable.
You are so full of it, man!
And I bet you thought I missed this one, but I sure didn't. He clearly does not say it.
You are so full of it, man! This is on the television show!
I'm doing it because it was badly written!
Gwen is all of us when we can't get past awful plot devices. Sometimes even I'm stumped. Not here, obviously. They're here because her speech is superb. Sure, it's been 19 minutes of the movie, but it was right after Fred digitally conveyed Jason off the rock planet that Sarah's aboard the ship, so they're probably still in orbit, if decayed a little bit, since it's on the bridge as far as we know. I have questions. Hentai has answers. Well, actually, the original R-rated cut also has some answers.
I'm shocked.
That line delivery is both so funny and so sad. They're so innocent.
Thy grandfather, by the sons of war, you shall be avenged.
There it is. Best moment of the film. They build it up the whole movie as a punchline, so we know it's coming, but Alan Rickman was a true actor. He doesn't do it over the top or damp it up. He doesn't cry while saying it. He does it subtly like the professional he was. It genuinely rivals the original Wrath of Khan moment that came from another professional. For the record, he wrote I Am Not Spock before Wrath of Khan and wrote I Am Spock after Wrath of Khan. Alexander did a speedrun of the whole arc, and it still works. It's as if Alexander finally realized what the line meant and how it had grown beyond him. Fun fact, his mom gave him the 10 minutes. She asked at 1:11:04, and he's running outside now at 1:22:45, so he had had it.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4.
Well, then neither of them say it, and they don't kiss. Yeah, there's tension, and sure they might secretly be in love with each other, but more than that, they're friends. Amazing that they don't even try to explain why Gwen's shirt is wide open. It's just a zipper, and it's zipped 5 seconds earlier. Ratings, that's why. I call it a continuity error, but I honestly don't think it is. For some reason, Saris is much wetter than before, and it makes him look way creepier. Unexplained wetness is a no for me. So I'm probably reading into it a bit much, but have you noticed that the Fatu Cray have oblong pupils like many prey animals have? Makes me think they moved beyond their evolution, which would be an interesting explanation for the ruthlessness.
You're sweaty!
That's what that is. Seriously, all the little movements in his head thingies and his shoulder thingies. Honestly, dope plan. The writing in this film is genuinely great.
You're alive!
Are they just happy noises?
This shit was the marble! As big as this! A very clever deception indeed!
Oh, he's not even mad at Jason. I mean, sure, it's because he doesn't understand that he wasn't actually telling the truth, but still. Iconic laughter, iconic clapping.
My people have no commander.
So I think your people are great.
Me a feel-good moment.
Jason, before the black hole, there was an energy surge from Cyrus's ship.
Honestly, another real Star Trek moment. Spock and Data were always telling their respective captains superfluous information, and sometimes said captains didn't filter correctly. Smart to shoot this scene in slow motion so no one can nitpick about how far the Omega-13 actually sends you back. Also, Guy, the guy who was convinced he would die, is the only guy who isn't shot when Ceres's bullets fly by. And visual effects that were mind-blowing at the time and are still stellar today.
Systems register functional.
All systems are working, Commander.
Earlier, a horn played when Jason got an idea, and it gave me Mission Impossible feels, and I don't think it was a coincidence. But now I'm 99% sure they're acknowledging that they have the baddest of the badass ladies on their crew.
Systems register functional.
All systems are working, Commander.
I enjoy this MacGuffin because I think it works for the plot, but it also feels like a very in-universe MacGuffin that absolutely would have been on the show. Every single Star Trek crew has time traveled at least a little. Maybe not Lorex. But some Discovery did a lot of time travel. I'll work on that.
Never give up, never surrender.
Got him. Friendship.
On, Tab, on.
Now there's a commander.
Hey, Brandon, why are you going to all those fireworks?
Vector got super accelerated coming out of the black hole, and his sight nailed the atmosphere on Mark 15, which you guys know is pretty unstable, obviously, so...
I love that while sure Brandon could be 90% sure this wasn't all a big prank, he reacts like he absolutely never doubted it first. Even when he sees the ship. What a payoff to all our little nerd hearts to have the annoying fans from the convention be the ones to save the day. Third best shot. Look, you're not keeping track. Let's just say this is a phenomenal shot. Definitely a 7 dead and dozens injured situation. Apparently the R-rated version had convention goers getting squished and decapitated. It would totally change the tone, but Lord, I think we all want to see that version. It takes an experienced MC to turn a literal spaceship crash into an intro. Someone in the editing room moved that line around, I have no doubt. But Ripley was never shy about her attire. And obviously Bleakley could deal. Bro is always ready to laugh. His exasperated smile is aces. He was never a villain on the show, but the crowd immediately knows he's a baddie and shoots him. The role helps, and absolutely pumps that Ceres goes out like an 80s or 90s villain. He just kinda explodes into a poop of smoke. Borderline corny the way it should be. Love. I actually do root for them. Dang, this movie just keeps on getting us. It's a stupid fake salute. It's been a joke the entire movie. Stop making me feel things. Brandon is living out every Trekkie's dream. I stand by my assertion that Jason was mostly a decent guy who loved his fans and the show, and since he didn't have to worry about money, was just having fun, but they still gave him an arc, which is great. Just because you're not a total piece of crap doesn't mean you don't have room to grow. Ha! Salty be damned, she doesn't even get a zipper this time. If you're gonna breast boobily, you might as well bust them bazooms the bosom-ist. Considering I'm not entirely sure Loliari understands that she's on a show, it makes sense they use her real name as her character's name. Sam Rockwell is always a win, plus Security Chief is definitely what he was born to play.
Never give up, never surrender.
Love how quiet this is, just for the nerds like us who waited till the end of the credits. This is one of those times I'm happy they didn't try a sequel right away, because they probably would have early aughts flubbed it, but I'm totally down for a legacy sequel now, or limited series like Paramount has been talking about for a decade.
You gotta
But
start
for now, we
listening.
have this near perfect
You gotta
movie
stop
that
waiting
is,
for me
according
to tell you
cinematic
5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times.
And it's definitely
You gotta
special.
stop
It's a
waiting
simple
for me to
concept,
start
but
yelling
so
before
compelling.
you start
I wonder if it
listening.
would work without the Star Trek Foundation. There's some close versions
You were
like
told to
Tropic
go to your
Thunder,
room.
like I
You
mentioned,
ignored
Three
it.
Egos. Nurse Betty comes to mind as well, but it would be hard to do any sci-fi version of this while trying to ignore Star Trek, so it might be impossible. But regardless, the story works on its own, obviously. You can enjoy Galaxy Quest completely fine without ever even hearing of Star Trek. In fact, I definitely saw this movie long before I got into Star Trek, so there you have it. N of 1. Anyway, the sequel would definitely have an Alan Rickman-sized hole, so I completely understand why it's been on hold since we lost him. And the truth is that no one can replace him, nor should anyone try. I think you can honor him by casting equally gifted and practiced actors. I believe Bill Nye or Gary Oldman could step in as his equally bitter brother, but then would lay the gravitas on even heavier in an attempt to live up to Rickman/Alexander/Lazarus, but failing spectacularly. Or better yet, cast Daniel Craig and have him play it totally straight, no shame in playing a silly alien doctor. Dames Helen Mirren or Judi Dench would be fantastic choices for a gender swap. Serious, renowned stage actors who, instead of rehashing how Rickman felt about it, they go full method. The options are endless. Make it, cowards. Next week, a non-movie.
Whoa, he's finished. Alexander, listen to me. It's okay.
Yes, your people call it.
Mass Effect 3 is a roller coaster of emotions for me. It's got an incredible start, but a terrible ending. It also has some wonderful decisions that can reshape the whole story, but it also has choices that are pointless, either because the difference is barely noticeable or are just completely rewritten to fit the story. It is a very stressful game to play, because one moment the story is on a roll and really starts to pick up speed, but then falls back down almost immediately. It is a game that has disappointed me greatly, and today I want to talk about why. So without further ado, let's get started. So Mass Effect 3 starts 6 months after Mass Effect 2. Shepard and the Normandy have been grounded here on Earth because of one of two things. Either because Shepard blew up the mass relay killing 300,000 Batarians if you played the Arrival DLC, or because they worked with Cerberus if you didn't do the DLC. Similar to Mass Effect 2, our crewmates are nowhere to be seen. We'll meet them all eventually later, but it seems like Shepard told the crew to go their separate ways and turn themselves in so that no one else had to deal with the interrogations that would come after. Already though, we're already introduced to one of our choices, the human ambassador. Udina replaces Anderson as counselor in Mass Effect 3 regardless of your decision. Even if you chose Anderson in Mass Effect 1, your decision is reverted to the one BioWare wanted you to choose. So as a whole, the counselor decision from Mass Effect 1 is pointless. Not only can your decision possibly get changed without your input, but Anderson and Udina barely made an appearance in Mass Effect 2 save for one side mission, and even then the change at most is a line or two of dialogue. After meeting with Anderson, we then meet with the Vermeer survivor and James Vega. James, as well as Ashley or Kaidan, depending on who lived, will be a part of our new crew. I want to hold off on the companion analysis until we get everyone on board, so we'll circle back to them later. Also, anytime I say Ashley, I also mean Kaidan. It would just get tedious if I kept repeating both of their names all the time. As you may have noticed though, it's only been a couple of minutes into the video, and we already have two comparisons across the playthroughs. Unlike the previous videos, we'll be talking about the Renegade playthrough a lot in this video, as this game has the most changes between our Paragon and Renegade characters. Once Shepard talks with Ashley for a bit, he will then meet with the Alliance Council and discuss his crimes. He also briefly mentions the Reapers and how they plan to attack soon. Soon must apparently mean now, as right after this the Reapers attack Earth. One thing I like about the Reapers in Mass Effect 3 is how they always go for the throat. Throughout the game, we'll learn about Reaper attacks on Palaven, Tachanka, and Thessia, which are the homeworlds of the Turians, Krogan, and Asari, respectively. The Reapers are all about going for big targets and taking them out as soon as possible. This shows off their overwhelming power because if the home planet can't defeat them, how is a colony at the edge of the Milky Way going to defeat them as well? Shepard, though, is going to be one of the unlucky few that's going to be seeing that destruction for themselves. Within minutes, the Reapers have turned the tide of battle and have destroyed everything in sight. Earth isn't completely gone yet, but seeing how much destruction has already been caused in just a few minutes, it's only a matter of time. While Anderson, Shepard, and Ashley escape, Shepard will come across this little kid hiding in the vents. This kid will eventually be seen hopping into a shuttle before it blows up. This death really affects Shepard a lot. Throughout the game, Shepard will have these dreams where he chases this kid through the forest. This kid is meant to be a representation of Shepard's struggle and trauma. That's because the kid is just that. A kid, someone who doesn't deserve this and was never a part of the war to begin with. A common sentiment amongst the army is that they're fighting so that those back home can be free, but in this case that idea has failed. Shepard and the crew fight to make sure the galaxy and its innocent inhabitants can live carefree lives, but the Reapers are just too powerful. Now every man, woman, and child has been swept up into this war whether they like it or not. It's quite a scary thought, which is why I really like this game's intro so much. There's no cool or hyped up introduction where everyone's gearing up and getting ready. It's a surprise attack against an ill-equipped species that has no idea what they're even fighting. Furthermore, the intro still shows how powerful the Reapers are, and honestly I think this holds up throughout the whole game. The only Reaper that has died so far was Sovereign back in Mass Effect 1, and it took a lot of firepower to bring it down. Mass Effect 3 recognized this and made sure that any time a Reaper dies in this game, it's either because of overwhelming damage or unconventional means. This was inevitably something the team was going to have to tackle, and instead of making the Reapers weak for the purposes of gameplay, they continued to uphold their strength, which I really appreciated. Because of that though, we aren't going to be shooting many Reapers in this game, which is why we fight a lot of ground troops like the Husks. This is also another problem the team would have to tackle, because having all the enemies be all Husks or all Geth is boring, so they need to add variety. But BioWare not only succeeded in creating a variety of enemies, but also made it lore accurate using a plot device I was hoping would return. We know from Mass Effect 1 and 2 that the Reapers can repurpose species to their liking. Husks are just repurposed humans, and the Collectors were originally Protheans. BioWare continued this idea, but extended it to the other species. We end up meeting new enemies like the Marauders, Brutes, Cannibals, and Banshees. All of them are repurposed versions of another alien species.
Cannibals used to be Batarians, Marauders used to be Turians, Brutes have the discipline and determination of a Turian, but the strength of a Krogan, and the Banshees used to be Ardai Byakhshi. This not only makes the combat more diverse and interesting, but also the story as well. Now, the lore nerd in me would have loved to see more variations from the other races like the Solarians and Quarians, but I'm content with what we got. But as I said, the story takes a more sinister turn thanks to this idea, because allies can now become enemies. So it's not just about defeating the Reaper forces, but also making sure no one dies in the process. It's unclear whether or not the person needs to be dead or alive for them to be turned into these things, but it still paints a very bleak picture. Your loss is the Reaper's game now, and they already have the odds stacked in their favor. This is just salt in the wound at this point. Getting back on track, once Shepard and Anderson get to a more secure location, Normandy comes by to pick them up, but Anderson decides to stay behind. Anderson plans to stay here on Earth and fight the good fight, while Shepard goes and gets help from the Council. Given their insistence on not even recognizing the Reaper threat, we can assume that it's going to be an uphill battle. Before we do that, though, Admiral Hackett gets on the comms and instructs Shepard to go to an Alliance base on Mars before the system is destroyed. One thing I must give credit to Mass Effect 3 for is how much attention was given to Hackett. In the first 2 games, he was just sort of a higher-up that occasionally gave orders. He still does that to an extent, but his role is much larger in this game. Same also goes for Anderson as well, which is something I was very happy to see, as they are very likable characters. Hackett wants Shepard to go to this base on Mars because the people here have been searching Prothean archives for ways to fight the Reapers. And who of all people do you think is leading this research team? The one and only Dr. Liara T'Soni. Liara not only has lots of knowledge on the Prothean people, but she also has the resources of the Shadow Broker, so she's able to help out in many different ways. According to Liara, within these archives was a blueprint for a device called the Crucible. This was apparently a Prothean weapon that was supposed to defeat the Reapers. Clearly it failed, but that's because they were missing a crucial piece called the Catalyst. What the Catalyst actually is unknown for now, which is fine because we still have to build the Crucible. But before that happens, we run into a familiar face who is less than pleased with our arrival. The Illusive Man shows up via hologram and basically taunts Shepard, telling them that he will fail and that he has a plan of his own that'll be more successful. Basically, the Illusive Man wants to control the Reapers. He believes that dominating the Reapers is how they win, because not only will they stop the threat, but they'll have the most advanced civilization under their control. It's a risky goal, but risky is his middle name. He spent billions of credits reviving one man and then sent his team on a suicide mission with the hopes of stopping the Collectors. If this was anyone else in the Mass Effect universe, I would immediately lose interest in this idea, but the Illusive Man has shown that he has the assets and the power to get shit done. So while the idea of controlling the Reapers does seem ludicrous, with him at the helm, it might not be. Cerberus showing up at the Mars base also creates some tension between Shepard and the Virmire survivor. The last time we met, both Ashley and Kaidan were very upset at Shepard's willingness to work with Cerberus, even if it was just a means to an end. 6 months later, and it's still the same. Similar to our meeting with them on Horizon, not only do the two not trust Shepard, they also have the same dialogue. Mass Effect has always committed to this idea that people will not believe Shepard, even with all the evidence laid out in front of them. This was the same problem Shepard had with the Council back in the first game, and even then it was drawn out and tedious. But Mass Effect is doing it again by continuing to bring up how Shepard worked with Cerberus and is therefore a bad guy. It's starting to become overplayed even in the same mission. Ashley and Shepard have a talk about his past with Cerberus, to which Shepard shuts her down, saying that they were only working together because of their common goal. Then later they find out that some of the Cerberus soldiers have been modified, and they seem to look like Reaper husks. Without skipping a beat, the first thing they will say is, what if you're being controlled? You don't know what they put in you, or if they're even controlling you. This is already absurd on its face, and we haven't even gotten to the Citadel attack yet. As an isolated incident, I feel like this wouldn't be that bad, but since everyone seems to ignore Shepard throughout the whole trilogy, this interaction with them really sticks out. Once the group has their chat with the Illusive Man, they end up finding a Dr. Ava Kor, who was seen sabotaging the facility at one point on the security cams. Dr. Ava realizes that she's been made and makes a break for it. She almost gets away until James rams his shuttle into theirs, crashing them both. This should have killed the crew, but it seems like Dr. Ava was synthetic and not actually human. She then takes this opportunity to critically injure Ashley before being put down by Shepard. Both Ashley and Dr. Ava are then taken to the Normandy, and the crew determines that taking Ashley to the hospital on the Citadel is the only way to save her. EDI also decides to figure out if she can inhabit Dr. Ava's body, and it surprisingly works. Similar to Legion, EDI now has a mobile platform she can walk around in, and now that she is mobile, she can now join us on some of our missions. Once we make it to the Citadel, we're then told to meet with the Council, but we can take a look around a bit as we can talk to some old friends. Citadel in Mass Effect 3 seems a bit lackluster in some aspects.
A lot of the areas are small and linear, whereas Mass Effect 1 had a lot more space to it. That's not to say all of them are bad though, as the Presidium Commons has a lot more twists and turns in its design. One thing that has stayed consistent across each game is the level's detail. The docking area is filled with refugees of all races, and there are so many different things happening at once. People are checking in, some are getting medical attention, and others are just sulking around. Some of the crew will also appear on the various levels, which makes things more realistic, and it allows for more conversations between you and the crew. While exploring the floors of the Citadel, you'll likely run across Dr. Chakwas and Ashley. Dr. Chakwas is here talking with a Dr. Michelle, who I had no idea was from Mass Effect 1. Way back in the beginning, when we first met Garrus and Rex, we were tasked with hunting down a guy named Fist. Well, some of his goons attacked Dr. Michelle, but we were able to save her. Speaking with Dr. Chakwas, though, we can offer her a spot on the Normandy again, and she happily accepts. As for Ashley, she's still unconscious for now, but you can say a few words to her if you want. Once our affairs are in order, we can meet with the Council and discuss the Reaper threat. This is also the first time we've met the Council in person since Mass Effect 1, and if you remember for the end of that game, we also had the choice of saving them or letting them die. And judging by their demeanor, it seems like the old Council is doing all right. But keen viewers may have recognized that I am lying to you. This is not the old Council, but rather the new one. The two biggest changes are that the Solarian Councilor is female and the Turian has a different colored face paint. Furthermore, both councils reinstate our Spectre status. In Mass Effect 2, it was possible to knock your Spectre status back, which, to be fair, didn't really mean much in that game since we were operating out of Council space for the most part, but regardless of our choice, it just gets reinstated anyway. If anything, this should have been the game to commit to this change, as just down the hall is the Spectre-only room. In here are Spectre-exclusive weapons and armor, but also a terminal that only Spectres can use. This allows you to give authority to specific requests. For example, 2 engineers were detained by the Alliance but can be released. These 2 also happen to be Donnelly and Daniels from Mass Effect 2. Most of these choices aren't too important, so it's not like you'd be missing a critical part of the story by not having your Spectre status. Plus, this could have led to alternate paths and other side missions, such as this one, where a Solarian Spectre needs you to authorize something, but because you aren't a Spectre, the side mission could change a bit. It doesn't have to be a completely different outcome, but just small enough to show that the mission has changed. I also want to bring up something before we continue because it's quite critical to understanding Mass Effect 3. Just like in the previous games, you can import your old characters so that your choices retain continuity. The only difference, though, is that in Mass Effect 3, the game tells you what those decisions were. This not only shows the player what they chose, but also what choices matter. We've made a lot of decisions throughout the course of this series, but some are more important than others, especially in Mass Effect 3. For example, saving the colonists on Pharaoh seemed quite important at the time, but according to Mass Effect 3, it's not as important as it's not on the list. And we can even see this in-game, as the most that Quest did was give us additional war assets, something I'll talk about later. It's still important, but not as important as something like the Council or the Rachni Queen. As another example, we can see that Malin's data is mentioned. That data was a part of Mordin's loyalty quest, but what makes him so special? We stopped in Ardat Yakshi in Samara's mission, destroyed a biotic camp in Jax, and stole back a gray box that could have sparked a war in Kasumi's mission. So why is Mordin so important? Because Malin's data was about the Genophage, which is a critical part of Mass Effect 3's plot, as we'll see in just a few moments. I wanted to go over this because the game is basically telling us that out of all the decisions we've made across the game, these are the ones that will have the most impact. However, this only applies to some of them, such as the bottom bullet points that talk about romance. Those were more for the player to remember who their lover is, as romancing has never had a direct impact on the story. So out of this list, I would say the most important ones that aren't just there to remind the player, but actually have potential to alter the game's story are the Rachni Queen, the Council, Malin's data, rewriting the Geth, and the Collector base. The others are just nice-to-know details. Rex being alive or dead changes the mission on Tuchanka, but doesn't alter it too much, and choosing one Virmire survivor over the other doesn't change much either, at least when it comes to the main quest. Already, though, we are 0 for 1, because the Council's decision is just as useless as the human ambassador. Not only do the Councils practically look the same, but they also act the same as well. They have the same dialogue and the same reactions to the missions when we report back to them. The only actual difference is that they become a part of a point system, one during a future Citadel mission and the other being the war assets. War assets are the main motivator for doing content in this game, and are integral to getting a good ending as well. I don't really like the war asset system, but it's not because of one isolated reason. It would be too hard to talk about that all at once, so we'll have to circle back to this system periodically throughout the video. If you save the Council, then you get the Destiny Ascension as a war asset. If not, then you'll get a few more aligned ships instead, since they would have been sacrificed to save the Asari ship. Technically, saving the Council is the better choice since the Destiny Ascension provides more war assets than the Alliance fleet, but that is one of the only changes this decision has. This makes the Council's decision no more important than the colonists on Pharaoh, since they also give us war assets, but shouldn't that mean that the colonists should appear on the list since they have the same outcome? Therein lies the problem. Mass Effect 3 claims that saving the Council was important, but both of our shepherds arrived at the same outcome, ultimately making this decision a waste of time. As you would expect, talking with the Council doesn't go well. They finally recognize the Reaper threat though, they're just 3 years too late, but refuse to help Earth and its citizens. Thankfully, the Turian Councilor has a plan, but we have to strike a deal because nothing involving the Council is ever simple. A Turian called Primarch Fedorian called a war summit, but it was unsuccessful. War summits are used to determine where races send their fleets and resources. We need the Primarch to start the summit, but as we'll soon see, not only is the Primarch dead, but the new one has his own deal involving Krogan, but the Krogan won't budge until the Genophage is cured. So we have to cure the Genophage to appease the Krogan, so that they can send reinforcements to Paladin, and only then will the Primarch send ships to Earth so that humanity can fight the Reapers there. What a headache. Thankfully, getting to the Primarch isn't too difficult, plus an old friend is here fighting alongside them. Garrus is here and is helping the Turian military as they deem him to be a Reaper expert. This mission is also a great example of how the game manages to patch up holes of the story that the companions used to occupy. Garrus died in our other playthrough, but because Garrus is present in this mission, the team runs into a problem. At least for this mission, the team opted to just remove him, but in some cases characters are replaced, like how Reeve took Rex's position in Mass Effect 2. What makes this mission so special though is that it's done in such a way that doesn't seem obvious. I had completely forgotten where Garrus was introduced in this mission when I went back and played it, and it was only when I made it to the final objective that I realized I'd already passed it. The game had managed to work around a character's death in a way that didn't compromise the overall story. Once we get through the war-torn moon and get the new Primarch to safety, we can call the War Summit. As we talked about earlier though, getting the Turian fleets to Earth is going to involve some complicated deals. Rex is here representing the Krogan army, and of course he wants the Genophage cured. Both Primarch Victus and the Salarian Dalatras are against this, but it's the only way, as without the Krogan support, Paladin is gone, and if the Turians are defeated, Earth can't get help, so Rex has forced our hand of it. The Genophage is one of the most well-known pieces of history within the Mass Effect universe, and I was kind of surprised that we were actually going to cure it, but I guess if I'm being honest, it was only a matter of time until this was settled. Drastic times call for drastic measures, which is why the mission Shepard will have to embark on are necessary for galactic survival. This also showcases how broken the relationships of these races are, because they're still reopening old wounds. To be fair, a widespread disease that causes an entire race to be infertile is dangerous enough for someone to hold a grudge, but the Krogan aren't the only ones with these grudges. None of the races in the galaxy are actually working together, and even if they offer to help, they want something out of it. Ashley even foreshadowed this back in Mass Effect 1, where she talked about how the other races will back each other and not worry about others when the going gets tough. Well, it's getting pretty tough, and everyone is more focused on fighting their own individual fights rather than coming together, which is the goal of Mass Effect 3. Get the races to come together under one banner and defeat the Reapers together. But doing that is not going to be easy. To start, we have to cure the Genophage, and to do that, we need to head to a remote base on the planet Surkash. The reason we're going here is that according to Rex, some of the female Krogan survived Malin's experiments. When the Salarians heard of this, the Dalatras sent in a team to take them prisoner, and they're being kept at this base on Surkash. As for who leaked the info, well, the answer might actually surprise you. Mordin is back and working with the STG again. This came as a bit of a surprise because Mordin was clearly in favor of the Genophage, but as he'll explain, he's had a change of heart. He says that he's getting old, but knows that he's the best candidate for the job, and if someone else was leading the team, they could make a mistake. And similar to Thane, he wants to do one last good thing before he goes. This may sound like he's seeking atonement, but I never saw it as such. Mordin has always seen things logically rather than emotionally. He still has his emotional moments, like when he condemned Malin's testing methods, but most of the time he thinks logically. This time he determined that the best course of action for the Krogan was to sterilize them, and now he thinks it's best that they're cured. It's not that he's sorry for what he did, but he realizes that this solution would be the best for the galaxy at this point in time. If Mordin is dead though, then a Salarian named Paddock Wicks replaces him. This mission is a good example of the opposite side of the spectrum. Instead of Mordin and Rex, we have Paddock and Reeve, and while the story still works, it just feels much better with the original two included. That pretty much sums up most of my thoughts on the main missions. Most are either well done or passable. Knowing what we know about Mordin and Rex, it makes sense that Mordin would be the head researcher on the Genophage, and Rex would want the Genophage cured.
We've only just been introduced to Paddock, so we don't really know what he wants. It never felt like Paddock really cared about the project, but rather the devs needed someone to replace Morden, so they threw in a random Solarian that acted like him. For Reeve, I think his ideals make sense as they're consistent amongst all Krogan, but that's what made Rex different. He went against the status quo to bring about change. Reeve isn't striving for change. Instead of the story being about a Krogan who went against his people to make sure they could live again, it's a story about one Krogan leader who's just like the rest, but happened to get lucky and be allied with Shepard. This debacle is what makes Mass Effect 3 so hard to talk about, because having Reeve and Paddock in the story really brings down quality, but that seems to be intentional, since the story seemed to be designed with the other two in mind. Another problem the team would have to tackle, and given how monumental the task is, I'm willing to give them a pass on a lot of this because making sure each story is just as interesting while also removing core characters from that story is hard to do. And like I said, most of them are either really well done or good enough. Regardless of whether or not Morden or Paddock is present though, something is wrong. The cure hasn't been successful yet. Many of the female Krogan that were fertile have died, except for one Morden nicknamed Eve. She is the last fertile Krogan left at the facility. Clearly she is of high importance, and Cerberus thinks so as well, as they crash the party and try to kill her. While we make a run for it, we can see some of the Solarian experiments, and it seems like they were experimenting on Varen and even some Yogg. Judging from the logs and datapads left around the facility, the Solarians were trying to domesticate or uplift the Yogg so that they could be useful to them, similar to what they did with the Krogan. Assuming you make it out alive, you escort Eve back to the Normandy and get a chance to talk with her. Eve really highlights something about the Mass Effect series that is lacking, and that's a feminine perspective. Most of the aliens we meet are male with the exception of the Asari. Talking with Eve allows us to see another side of the Krogan. As we know, the Krogan mostly fight each other and see the women as prized possessions, and I've always wondered what the women of the Krogan think about this, and Eve was able to communicate that to me. Eve says that when Clan Werlock was trying to cure the Genophage, the same clan from Morden's loyalty mission, she and some of the other women volunteered. Shepard questions this because Werlock is a rival clan. Eve claims that rivalries are a creation of the males, and that's what led to Tuchanka looking like a deserted ruin. Furthermore, Eve wants the women to rule the Krogan again, just like they did back in the day. This was the kind of thing I've always wanted to hear from the other races, but this trilogy never gave it a thought. We can meet two Solarian women throughout the trilogy, the new Counselor and the Dalatrass, both of whom provide no insight into their species' history. We also end up meeting two Turian women as well in a couple of DLCs, and the same goes for them too. The small amounts of info we have, we know that Turian women served alongside the men in the military, and Solarian women were usually kept safe on their homeworlds. Furthermore, Solarians don't mate unless it's for reproduction, and even then they usually sign contracts and pick people with the best bloodline so they can get the most out of it. There was a whole side quest about this in Mass Effect 2 on Ilium. I've always wanted to know how the other gender views the race's culture because it allows us to learn more about them. Mass Effect's world building has always been something I've taken an interest in, and seeing each perspective opened up my eyes to a lot of this game's history. I just wish the same happened for the other races too. With Eve on the Normandy, Morden can get working on a cure, and while we wait, we can do some side missions. I was going to save these for the side content section later, but Mass Effect 3 has a couple missions that are technically side content, but really should be done right away. We get these missions from the Primarch and from Rex. Apparently, Rex found traces of the Rachni near Remote Relay. This is odd for both playthroughs, as in one we killed her, but in the other we told her to hide away from the rest of the galaxy, but that doesn't seem to be happening. When we arrive, we see that the person leading this company of Krogan is none other than Grunt. If Grunt is dead, though, it's a Krogan named Gag. We and Grunt split up and find Rachni, but they seem to have been Reaper-fied. Once we make it to the bottom, we realize that the original Rachni Queen is down here and has been kept here by the Reapers. If she died back in Mass Effect 1, then it's a fake Rachni Queen that was made by the Reapers. Both of them look identical and were given the same options in both playthroughs, spare or kill her. Doing this provides us with a few options, which can get a bit complex. Basically, if we save the Queen before and then save her again, she gets added to our war assets. If we instead choose to leave her, then we get some of Grunt's team as war assets. If it's the fake Queen, though, saving her gives us both Grunt's team and her as a war asset, but she ends up betraying you and you lose them. Killing her, though, is the same as before. Grunt's team is a war asset. On paper, it sounds quite complex, and to an extent it is, but it's this exact mechanic that keeps bothering me. Mass Effect Everson's 2 always felt like the team went overboard with certain parts of the game. Mass Effect 2 gave us 12 companions, and to many that was a bit too much. Even though I love that game's companions, 12 is a lot to juggle at one time, which is why Mass Effect 3 dialed it back to 7. In Mass Effect 3, the companions were replaced with war assets. Just about everything in this game contributes to the war effort, no matter how small it may seem.
This quest is supposed to be one of the big options according to that list earlier, and yet not only are the queens exactly the same, but your decision also ends up being war assets every single time. It's the same exact thing as the council, similar design and similar outcome. I understand how important the war assets are in this game, but we don't even get to see our choices. The Arachnite decision isn't tangible, it's just numbers on a screen. This is the last time we will ever see the Arachnite Queen and her species again. She was supposed to have one of the biggest choices in Mass Effect 3, but all she got was about 7 minutes of screen time across the trilogy. It just feels like a waste of time because this choice doesn't matter either. Like I said, technically it does matter, but having all these decisions just become war assets diminishes their impact greatly, because now it's not, oh, saving the Arachnite Queen changes this one part of the mission, which then leads to another side objective. It's now just, saving her adds 100 to the war asset number, and that is just not satisfying to me. The quest is also in the outlier category when it comes to patching up the story. As I said, most of these missions are either well done or good enough. This is one of those missions that just doesn't feel right without Grunt. Dag is likable enough since he has the personality of a normal Krogan, but this final cutscene with him is just bizarre with him involved. If Shepard saves the Queen, Grunt fends off the Rachni, and it's a really touching scene as it looks like Grunt's going out in a blaze of glory. If he's loyal though, then he survives, but it's still quite gut-wrenching to watch. This same exact scene plays out with Dag, and it just feels so out of place. Grunt and Shepard have history, so having the mission play out this way makes sense, but Dag is just some guy we met on this mission, and the music comes in like he's sacrificing his life for a friend, which is just odd. After finishing our mission with Grunt, we can report back to the Normandy and do Primarch Victus's mission. Apparently his son is stranded on Tuchanka and needs to be rescued. After being asked why he's on the Krogan homeworld, the Primarch says it's classified. We learn from his son, though, that there's a bomb on Tuchanka that's about to go off. Furthermore, we also learn that it's not only a Turian bomb, but that Cerberus is the one who's trying to blow it up. This mission isn't too important regarding story plots, but it does highlight the game's commitment to urgency. We'll see more examples of this in the side content section, but Mass Effect 3 handles urgency pretty well. Urgency is a difficult topic to talk about, and one I personally hate discussing. It's hard to create a sense of urgency in a game like Mass Effect, where the player can go wherever they want and do whatever side missions they want. Cyberpunk got criticism for this because in that game the main character has about 3 weeks to live, but you can wait over 3 weeks in-game and nothing happens. Some thought that Cyberpunk had no urgency because of this, which confused me because if the game only gave us 3 in-game weeks to finish the story, then it would suck. That's why I only look at the main missions themselves to see if it fits. There is currently a war going on in Mass Effect 3, so Shepard shouldn't be delaying the mission to go dance on the Citadel. But BioWare knew this and took it even further than I thought they would, as not only do the main quests keep that sense of urgency, but so do the side quests. All the main missions make sense and all take into account the Reaper threat. It feels like there's never any downtime during the missions because you're constantly going from one task to the next because people's lives are on the line. Even the 2 missions we just talked about uphold this idea because the Rachni making a move on the galaxy is strange and is definitely something we should check out. And rescuing the Primarch's son at first might not seem important, but it could possibly give us an upper hand as he would owe us a favor, plus it worked out anyway since we discovered there's an active bomb on the planet. All of the main missions and just about every side mission has a sense of urgency, and I'm really glad BioWare recognized this when creating them. Now that both missions are finished though, we can finally cure the genophage, but doing that is easier said than done. According to Mordin, there's a building called the Shroud that protects Tuchanka from solar radiation. Mordin believes that, in theory, they could disperse the cure from the Shroud, allowing it to cure the planet's inhabitants of the disease. To do that, though, they're going to need to go through a giant Reaper, which is currently destroying the planet. The plan is to attack from the air and the ground at the same time so that we can draw its attention away from the Shroud. Sounds like a decent enough plan, but once we land on Tuchanka, Reeve starts an argument with Rex. This is another reason why Rex being alive is a lot better than having him dead. As we know from Mass Effect 2, Reeve operates like a normal Krogan, but Rex is different. It creates this tense bout between 2 brutes as they have different ideals and different ways of upholding those ideals. But if Rex is dead, it's not Rex versus Reeve, it's Reeve versus Jorgal. Jorgal is a new character, but he acts like Reeve, which is why the story takes a hit, since it's just 2 meatheads having a dick measuring contest, instead of a Krogan who goes against the status quo versus the one who's stuck in his ways. After this, the team will continue on, and do you remember when I said that taking down a Reaper was going to be tough, and that the methods were either going to be overwhelming power or something unconventional? Well, this is exactly that. Because Eve thinks if we can ring the hammers here on Tuchanka, we can summon Calros, the mother of all Thresher Moths. And it actually works. Ringing the hammer summons Calros, who kills the Reaper without much effort. Oddly enough, around this time, Rex daps Shepard up and tells him that no matter what happens, Shepard will always be known as a hero to the people of Tuchanka.
and a Paragon interrupt occurs, which I think is the first time this occurs in the main story. Mass Effect 3 has changed the morality system a bit. Morality is now named Reputation. This has an effect on the game that I didn't notice until much later. The best example is right at the end of the game where Shepard meets the Illusive Man. Similar to Saren, we can force the Illusive Man to take his own life if our speech checks are high enough, but in that game we only had access to one side of the dialogue, because our Shepard was a full Paragon. In Mass Effect 3, though, this changes. It's not based on how much Paragon or Renegade you have, but how much of both you have. Our Paragon Shepard, as you would expect, has a lot of Paragon and not a lot of Renegade, yet they can still choose the Renegade option because their overall reputation is extremely high. On our Renegade Shepard, though, we have lots of Renegade, but can't choose the dialogue option because our overall reputation is too low. I honestly really like this system a lot, and it's probably the best version of the morality system so far in the series, because you aren't locked out of a specific dialogue just because you stuck with one alignment. It allows the player to play how they want and not how they should. Play detour aside, once Rex and Shepard shake hands, they go their separate ways and attempt to ring the hammers. Once Calros is summoned, Shepard can then meet with Mordin, who says that the device must be fired manually, which means for Mordin, this is a one-way trip. He is at the end of his life, as he said, and dying here is probably the best way for him to go. You can, however, sabotage this whole ordeal if you want to. For the Tuchanka mission, the Dalatras meets and asks if you can sabotage the cure, so that the Krogan believe that they're cured. This would allow us to win over the Krogan just long enough for them to help out Palaven so the Turians can send their troops to Earth. I clearly didn't kill Mordin, nor do I want to. As he said, the Genophage needs to be cured now, and if he deems it to be the time, then it's time. Mordin then ascends the Shroud and sings the same song he sang back in Mass Effect 2, which is a nice callback to that scene. Mordin is still one of my favorite characters in Mass Effect, and seeing him go is sad, but his death is not wasted. He lived a fulfilling life, and having his legacy be known as the doctor who cured the Krogan is quite the title to have. As for Paddock, though, I shot him right away. Also, because I didn't have Malin's research in the Renegade playthrough, Eve actually died. Not only did the Krogan not get cured, but the last fertile female is dead as well. The Krogan are truly doomed in that playthrough. Finishing this mission, though, concludes the first act of Mass Effect 3, and so far the story has been on a roll. The prologue starts off really strong with the return of the Reapers and the destruction of Earth, and Act 1 continues the intensity by having us cure the Genophage, something that has been a core of Mass Effect's history since the game's inception. And Act 2 is about to get even more intense as we're tasked with solving the war between the Geth and the Quarians, something that's been going on for over 300 years. But before we do that, though, we have two things to handle first. We received information that there is a Prothean artifact on Eden Prime, and that Udina is moving vast amounts of money on the Citadel, which is something he hasn't done before. Both of these seem pretty low priority given the war going on and all, but both of these missions are actually very important. If we go back to Eden Prime, the same place we visited all the way back in Mass Effect 1, we'll uncover a pod with an alien in it. This alien's name is Javik, and he is a Prothean, the only one of his kind. The Protheans, if you remember, are one of the most important races in the series, as they were wiped out 50,000 years ago. And it's because of their advanced tech and impressive tactics that we were able to find the plans for the Crucible and discover Vigil back on Ilos. So it's thanks to the Protheans that we were able to stop Sovereign from summoning the Reapers all those years ago. Even if you were never told that Javik was a Prothean, you could easily infer that this was the case since the Collectors have a similar design. Javik is clearly confused, concerned, dazed, and probably a dozen other adjectives, seeing as he was frozen for over 50,000 years, but he manages to calm himself down. While trying to unlock Javik's pod, we can peer into his history, thanks to Shepard getting that cipher back in Mass Effect 1. We can see that the Protheans have advanced technology and even biotic abilities. It also seems like they too were overrun by the Reaper's overwhelming power. The plan, just like the researchers on Ilos, was to put themselves into cryosleep until the next civilization comes by and opens the pods. Sadly, this took longer than intended, and power had to be conserved in moves that the pods could still operate. This meant taking power from other pods, which is why Javik is the only one alive. Being revived after 50,000 years and being told that not only are you the only Prothean left, but that the Reapers are back and are still winning is a lot to take in. It also doesn't help that to Javik, all the races in the galaxy are still considered primitive to him, because, well, to be honest with ourselves, no one has created anything like the beacon on Eden Prime, so this cycle is way behind in technology. This exact sentiment has been a growing concern for many in the galaxy, and rightfully so. If the Protheans couldn't defeat the Reapers, what makes you think that we will? That's what makes the story of Mass Effect 3 so great, because Shepard is changing the world, and doing things no one has done before. Javik says that the Protheans fought alone because the galaxy couldn't work together in his cycle. In our cycle, we can see that this has changed. So far, we've gotten the Krogan, Turian, and Solarians to join humanity, and now it's time to get the Geth and the Quarians. But as I said, we'll have to deal with Udina first. We'll talk about Javik a bit more when we get to our final companion, which is coming up in a few moments, but to get there we'll have to stop a coup from happening, and depending on our actions, we might end up actually losing a companion in the process. We talked about earlier, Udina is apparently moving a large number of around, which is concerning the Solarian Counselor, and he wants us to out. Good thing we did, because we discovered it was more than just money laundering. Udina is working with Cerberus to stage a coup on the Citadel. Cerberus has managed to overwhelm C-Sec, so it's up to us to stop him. And here where we get introduced to Kai Lang. I do not like, and that probably won't come as a surprise. A lot of my complaints stem from his first impressions are important in any context. This first interaction will dictate how we judge a character going forward. Sometimes it's used as a way to subvert expectations or allow for a character to grow, like with Miranda, who was nicknamed Ice Queen, but it's becoming a lot more personable when you speak to him. Kai Lang seems to be an assassin, and seeing as he's using a sword in a sci-fi game, we can assume he has some amount of skill with such a weapon. Not even Thane used bladed weapons. He also was an assassin. He talks about killing someone with a sniper rifle. Speaking of Thane, he comes in to save the Solarian Counselor. It isn't as jarring as it looks, as you can meet him at the hospital a few times. It's mostly just to catch up and see what he's been up to. The part that is jarring, though, is that Thane almost beats him. From our talks with Thane, we can see that he is just waiting for his time to pass. The temporal syndrome that has been affecting him since the last game is still progressing, and we know from the later Shadowbroker dossiers that Thane was instructed to rest and not do any strenuous activity, or he could essentially die faster. So Thane is a terminally ill Jarrell with some type of asthma, since temporal syndrome affects his lungs, yet not only did he keep up with Kai Lang, he almost beat him. Kai Lang barely manages to escape thanks to him stabbing Thane with his sword. Thane will pull through, so he's not dead yet, but this fight has sealed his fate. The problem with this fight is that from this first impression, you don't get the sense that Kai Lang is a great assassin, but rather an incompetent one. He comes off as inexperienced and in way over his head, and I can't tell if this was supposed to be. Some of the dialogue seems to point towards Kai Lang being designed by the writers as an assassin who thinks he's the best, but then other dialogue says he's the best. Even if Kai Lang was meant to be a terrible assassin, that still wouldn't remedy the problem, since he seems to stop us at every turn. Kai Lang is here during the Citadel mission, which goes nowhere as all he does is stab Thane and then destroy our car. He then arrives on Thessia a bit later for a lukewarm boss fight, since he's designed not to die, and then magically overpowers the team even if you were destroying him the entire fight. This then all culminates at the Cerberus headquarters where you can actually kill him, but the fight is okay at best. Quite easy to defeat Kai Lang, and that's a real issue, because BioWare is capable of making a villain that matches their strength. Both of the fights with Saren were quite tough. You fought him in small rooms with limited cover, and you had to put hundreds of rounds into him. Difficulty is always going to be subjective, at least on normal difficulty. His large health and deadly abilities complemented his role as the main villain. Obviously, Kai Lang isn't the main villain of the game, but he is a looming threat, one that doesn't live up to the role at any point in the story. He also suffers from having the most annoying personality I have ever seen. Kai Lang is basically a weeb ninja. He uses a physical sword in the Mass Effect universe, and when outnumbered 3-1, his first line of dialogue is, now it's fun. I was half expecting him to say something like, good try, Shepard, but that was only 10% of my power. You haven't even seen my final form yet. He also taunts you via email after you encounter him on Thessia, and just read this. What kind of light Yagami-ass speech is this? However, there is still one way we can redeem him. For probably the first time all game, the Renegade option actually has the better story. Thane is dead, Captain Kirihee from Vermeer replaced him. Since both are dead in that playthrough, that means Kai Lang has no one standing in the way. Furthermore, when we reach Udina later, he shows fabricated footage of Shepard shooting the Counselor. This would easily make the player furious at Kai Lang for setting them up like that, and it would continue to break the relationship between the Council and Shepard, one that was admittedly quite broken already. As a whole, I think Kai Lang as a concept is great, this assassin that is constantly stalking Shepard and foiling his plans. but he suffers from having very little interaction with the player, and anytime he does interact with them, he always seems to come out on top no matter the context. Once we make it through a few gameplay arenas, we'll come to the top floor where Udina and the other counselors are, and protecting them is Ashley. Depending on our actions here and some choices before this, Ashley may not make it out of here alive. Ashley still believes that Shepard is working with Cerberus and is willing to shoot us if we don't comply. This either ends with Ashley getting shot and dying, or turning on Udina and siding with us. Quite infuriating that Ashley still won't believe us, but I like how past choices can affect this, as romancing her in Mass Effect 1 adds points, but cheating on her in Mass Effect 2 takes away points. No matter what happens though, Udina is shot and killed for his actions, and the Council finally takes a liking to us. I'm surprised it took this long for that to happen though. After this though, we are going to have to say goodbye to Thane. This was quite expected, seeing as he took a sword to the stomach, and the Keppel syndrome was already progressing at a fast rate, just accelerating the process. The whole scene, though, is really sweet and well done, as Kolyat is here and you can join him in saying prayers. This surprises Thane, as these are prayers from religions that many Drell don't believe in anymore. Thane is happy to see that his son is not going down the path as being a better person. The prayer that the three recite, though, was not for Thane, but actually for Shepard. Thane always prayed after a kills that he was absolved of his sins, and Shepard questioned this because Thane wasn't killing someone because a contract said so. He tried to attack Kai Lang because he wanted to. He was a hero in that moment, not an assassin, which is where Kolyat reveals that this prayer was for Shepard and his journey. Even in his final moments, Thane wanted to make sure Shepard was okay and that his journey was free of despair and harm. That told me. Thane was easily one of the most likable and unique companions, too, and seeing his devotion to Shepard and his cause through this was gut-wrenching. BioWare really wanted to get the tears flowing in this entry, as so far Mordin and Thane have died for us so that we can complete it. This connects to a few conversations that we'll have with some of the crew, because throughout this whole trilogy, Shepard has gone from one thing to the next and hasn't really had a chance to sit down. Even though he had a 6-month break in between games, the threat of the Reapers is still out there, and he can't rest until this war is done. So it's no wonder that this war is still affecting him. All this death and loss that he's experienced is something no one should go through. Once we finish up with Thane and Kolyat, we can meet with Ashley or Kaidan and talk to them about what just happened. You can also ask them to join your team again, or tell them that they are best suited under Hackett's leadership. It's minor, but I like the small degree of choice we're given here, because if you really don't like them, given their opinions of you on Horizon and Mars, you can just essentially tell them to kick rocks and never return. Losing a companion hurts, but I'm happy that BioWare is finally committing to the idea that companions have plot armor and can leave the team if certain conditions arise. After this brief intermission, though, we're able to start Act 2. Admiral Hackett says that the Turian support ships they sent are stretched thin, so we need more fleets, but for us, the Quarians are willing to talk, as they too have their own problems. We then meet with the Quarian admirals, who are the same ones from the last. Admirals Ron, Han Garel, Chorus, Zen, and their new ambassador, Tali Zora. Tali will join us for most of these missions as well, but if she is dead, then her aunt, Admiral Ron, will take her place. Tali is an admiral because she's an expert on the Geth, and because her dad used to occupy the other admiral spot, but since he died in Tali's loyalty mission, that spot was left open. However, despite there being 5 admirals, the Quarians are more divided than ever. We saw a bit of this back in Mass Effect 2, but just as a refresher, the admirals have different feelings on the Geth and whether or not the Quarians should go to war with them. Admiral Han Garel is the leader of the Heavy Fleet, and he is in favor of reclaiming Rannoch and going to war with the Geth. Admiral Zen, leader of the Special Projects Division, has always been in favor of defeating the Geth, because she still sees them as machines that need to be controlled. Admiral Chorus, leader of the civilian fleet, was labeled a Geth apologist in the last, because he believes that the Geth deserve Rannoch as their sentient creatures and should not have been fought. Admiral Ron is the leader of the patrol fleet, and while she doesn't outright take a side, she does seem to be in favor of war, as she does help some of the admirals by providing provisional support for them. Tali is possibly indecisive, depending on whether or not she talked with Legion back in Mass Effect 2. Speaking of Legion, we'll end up meeting him very soon, as when we meet with the admirals, they ask us to take out a Geth dreadnought that is currently pounding their forces. The one who is controlling it is Legion, but not of his own volition. After Legion left the Normandy and went back to the Geth, they created a mega server that houses all their memories and data so that the Geth no longer had to be isolated from each other. Right after its construction, though, the Quarians attacked, so they had to defend themselves and their server. This caused them to panic because the Geth operate better in groups. As we know from Mass Effect 1, the Geth get smarter when there are more of them around, so when they started dying, their intelligence got worse. Geth were basically doomed to die until the Reapers offered to help them. They didn't want to ally with the Reapers, but they determined that it was the only choice. They only joined them because they wanted to live. Like I said just a second ago, as we know from the previous games, due to how the Geth were made, the more there are, the smarter they get. Well, with the Reaper upgrades, this is no longer needed. They are essentially as strong as they can be without the need for each other. From here, though, we're tasked with doing two different side missions, similar to Act. First is that the Geth have a planetary defense cannon on Rannoch, the former Quarian homeworld, and Admiral Chorus decided to sacrifice his own ship in order to blow it up. Thankfully, he survived the crash, but now we have to rescue him. This sounds like a waste of time, but Admiral Chorus dying would be a huge blow to morale and defenses for a plethora of reasons. Quarians decided to convert all their ships into dreadnoughts, even the civilian ones, which admittedly is kind of impressive. The issue, though, is that the civilian fleet shares the same ideals as Chorus, so not only is their ship being turned into a target for the Geth, but they're also forced to fight an enemy they didn't want to fight in the first place. Admiral Chorus dying in a war that he didn't want to be a part of would easily piss off the rest of the civilian fleet and make their final push onto Rannoch much harder. The mission goes just about how you would expect, but I do love this one encounter with a Dorn Hotz, a Quarian that was a part of the civilian fleet. It tells us how we need to find the Admiral because the civilian fleet never war, and if anyone is going to be able to get them out alive, it's Dorn also says, though, that he's never shot a gun before, and now he's bleeding on the ground. This could not only show how reckless Chorus is by just crashing onto a planet with civilians aboard, but also just how warped the Quarians have become due to this war with the Geth. Now sending civilians into the fray, even if they've never shot a gun before. As for Legion, he says that there are Geth fighter squads that plan to attack the Quarians and will likely succeed if stopped. The problem, though, is that we can't just blow up their server or stop their ships. We have to go inside the Geth consensus and take them that way. So Shepard gets sent inside and has to shoot these yellow strands. Geth. This isn't normally how it looks, though, because Legion is creating an environment that is familiar to Shepard, which is why we're shooting at these strands of code, since technically all of this is being handled digitally. Inside the server, we can see some of the memories of the Geth, see how poorly they were treated by the Quarians once they started to gain sentience. I honestly find it quite hard to talk about the Geth and Quarian war, because to me I see both sides of the argument. Accidentally creating a sentient AI is scary and should probably be shut down immediately, but the Geth were well within their rights to fight back. Regardless, though, you'll likely have noticed that the missions have changed. Whereas Act 1's missions were just about helping the Krogan and Turians with their problems, Act 2's missions showed the player a different side of each faction. Mass Effect 3 really wants you to see the horrors of this war and all the people who are involved in it, and then force you to make a choice. Geth or Quarians win the war, or should they broker peace? Before we make that decision, though, we have to deal with another Reaper. This one dies in a more conventional way through overwhelming power, but we do have to get up close to it so we can use the targeting laser. Right before it dies, we can talk to it, and all it really says is that they represent order and the world represents chaos. When Shepard tells it that they deserve an answer, all it says is that it's something they can't comprehend. Afterwards is where we get to make our choice. Legion says that the Geth are no longer under the control of the Reaper. Legion asks Shepard if they deserve death, since the Admiral plans to fire on the Geth now that their ships lay dormant in space. Legion suggests that he upload the Reaper code to the Geth so they can gain the sentience and power that they had while under Reaper control, but without the Reapers actually controlling them. This is where we have to decide the fate of an entire race. If we side with Legion, the Geth upload their code and attack the Quarians, wiping them out for good. Tali will also kill herself since all her people are now dead. If we side with the Quarians, then Legion will attack, but not before being shot by Tali or Admiral Ron. However, it is possible to get the best of both worlds and, for the first time in 300 years, create peace between these two groups. Similar to the encounter with Ashley, some of our decisions are part of a point system. Some of these are present in Mass Effect 3, such as saving Admiral Chorus, but most of these are in Mass Effect 2. Destroying instead of rewriting the Geth, making sure Tali isn't exiled in her loyalty mission, making sure the two come to an agreement during their confrontation are critical to making sure this ending goes well. These are the kinds of choices I was hoping for in Mass Effect. Something that may seem insignificant now, but becomes very important later, is something I wanted to see from this series, because it not only makes achieving a good ending harder, but also makes the playthroughs more unique. Not everyone is going to come out of this mission with the same ending. That's the kind of dramatic storytelling I was hoping for. The fight between the Geth and the Quarians has been relevant in every game, and all of our choices all culminate in the final decision. If you took a liking to the Quarians through Tali, you might be more inclined to side with the Quarians. Furthermore, seeing how the Geth operated in Mass Effect 1 may have caused you to dislike them from the get-go. But interacting with the Quarians may have also prompted a different reaction, one that's not as pleasant. Seeing the civilians be thrown into a war they never wanted, while also being ordered around by 4 admirals that can't even agree with each other, might make siding with the Quarians a difficult choice. War is a trilogy-long issue. Getting that good ending is difficult, so it forces a lot of players to make an actual choice, one that is quite hard to make. Regardless of our decision, though, Legion will either die by force or through sacrifice. His death gave the rest of the gang intelligence. Before dying, though, Tali brings up the question that started the war in the first place.
Answer to your with yes.
Just like the Genophage, it was only a matter of time until this situation was put to rest, and it sits alongside the Rachni Queen, one of my favorite questions Mass Effect poses to the player. Should something that wasn't sentient but now is be granted the same rights as all other sentient ones, or should it remain a robotic servant? It's a philosophical question, so ultimately it's not going to have a proper answer, but that's the point. You take in everything you've experienced across all 3 games, then figure out where you stand. This is your story, after all. The centuries-long war finally put to an end, we can move on to the second half of Act 2, but since Tali has joined our party, that means we've gotten all of our companions. So let's quickly talk about our new members and also see what our old cast has been up to. The first person we end up meeting is the Virmire Survivor. I mentioned how I wasn't a big fan of Ashley and Kaidan in Mass Effect 2 because they weren't 2 separate people, but just some entity called the Virmire Survivor, a person who has been on the base of Horizon and despises Shepard for working with servers. Mass Effect 3 continues this sadly, as the 2 are always in the same. The only major difference is their personal dialogue and side mission. Mass Effect 3 doesn't really place a whole lot of priority on the companions this time. 2 had 2/3 of the game dedicated to their recruitment and loyalty missions. This fits with the overall plot of the game, as we aren't creating a small team, but rather an army. As such, the crew doesn't have any loyalty missions, and we can't really talk with them, at least not in the traditional sense. Most of the dialogue starts with us going up to them and pressing the correct button, which prompts them to say a line or 2 of dialogue about the mission. For example, after rescuing Eve, if you talk to Garrus, he'll comment on her strength and courage given all she's gone through. This is the same for all the crew, so you'll end up getting into a routine of doing a main mission, then circling the Normandy to hear everyone's opinions. This, however, can get a bit tedious at times, especially when they decide to leave their post, as the crew can move floors and go somewhere else. But this was a great addition to the game, as it makes things feel more alive, like the crew has a functional social life and isn't just sitting in their rooms waiting for to talk to them. Furthermore, each companion will also ask to meet on the Citadel when you have free time. It allows you to talk to them more or possibly continue a romance if applicable. The Citadel mission is really where Ashley and Kaidan start to differ. Everything up until the Citadel attack is pretty much the same. Both of them were attacked and hospitalized, and then after some time got a recommendation from Udina to join the Spectre. They then joined and helped guard the Council from you until they either died or were convinced to stand. Assuming you allow them to join you, though, you can visit them on the Normandy and for their side mission. Kaidan's is more about relaxation, as he's initially worried about his mom, who's alone at home thanks to his dad serving in the war and being MIA. To offer some encouraging words, you can also join him on the Citadel for some lunch. Kaidan claims that he needed to have a sanity check, which is why he came to the cafe. Sure, you can continue your romance with him if you want, but if not, the 2 of you discontinue. As for Ashley, she's initially worried for her sister because her husband was called back into the service due to the Reaper War. It is discovered later, though, that her husband was eventually killed in action. As part of her side mission, you can join her and her sister and offer your sympathies while visiting the memorial wall on the Citadel. Overall, they aren't amazing missions, but I assume that if you like Ashley and Kaidan, then you might like these missions. Besides those missions, though, not much else really happens with Kaidan. Ashley, however, goes through a bit of an arc. In Mass Effect 1, she was very much against working with aliens, and you as Shepard could condemn her for thinking this way if you wanted to. In Mass Effect 3, though, it seems like she's been more accepting of the crew, as she offers to talk to Liara after the mission, which will make sense when we get to that mission, and if Tali dies in the Rannoch mission, she'll ask Shepard to leave her alone for a bit since Tali was like a sister to her. I think my only complaint with this is that I wish more of it was forced onto the player, not just hidden behind some small dialogue, because it's very easy to get these talks, and if you don't remember to be with her, you'll just go on thinking she hasn't changed when she actually has. Overall, though, I do like her character arc, and it's also the main reason why I came to it. It really feels like Ashley was the canon choice for this season. I know talking about canonicity is pointless, it's your story, but Ashley not only has a different personality, but an arc and a complete makeover. If Ashley being the canon choice isn't true, it's very obvious that she got more attention than Kaidan. I I said that I liked Caden in Mass Effect 1 more, and that's still true as I really like his backstory, but if we're talking about the whole trilogy, Ashley clearly wins because Caden doesn't change. Now, you don't need to make a character change all the time in order for them to be likable, but being stagnant is a problem. A great example is our next companion, Garrus. Garrus has always been fighting justice. A part of him has never changed. The ways he went about doing it, though, are what makes his story interesting, and he went to great lengths in order to achieve his goal. He went from fighting with Commander Shepard to being a vigilante that had 3 of Omega's top gangs fighting against him. His core ideals had never changed, but the ways he went about doing them did. But in the Collectors, Garrus worked with some of the Turian military and got his own Reaper task force. It's not something he really wanted, since he's not exactly an expert on the Reaper. He knows about as much as anyone else does, with the only difference being that he's actually survived a fight with one, which, I guess given the circumstances, is a lot better than anyone. This job really weighs down on him, though, since he, like many of the top officials, are in charge of millions of people's lives. A lot of pressure for someone who's been a vigilante for a few years and only really followed the rules in CSIC. In those days, crimes were galaxy-wide attacks, and the only people he had to worry about was his squad back at Omega. But that's where the brotherly love comes in, as him and Shepard are both struggling over the loss of their people, but they always seem to pick each other up when they need it, which is why his side mission felt special, as it was the first time the two could just relax, which really cements their friendship. Once Garrus joins the crew, he gets to work on calibrating like he usually does. He asks you to join him on the Citadel. Originally, I thought this would involve drinking, and I guess I was half right, as Garrus takes us to a restricted area and we start shooting drinks with sniper rifles. The phrase, brother from another mother, fits these two perfectly. We've gone through hell and back twice now, and now it's about to be the third. However, one sad detail I noticed during the Palaven mission is James asked about Garrus' family on Palaven, and he said he had a dad and sister. But in the lair of the Shadow Broker, there's a conversation between him and his sister about their mother. It seems like their mom had some sort of terminal illness, and the money the two had was not going to be enough to pay for procedures. Given that he doesn't mention her, we can assume that she passed away in between games. How consistent Garrus has been throughout the series is not the only one that's shown up multiple times. The other two veteran companions are Liara and Tali. Liara, as we know, is the new Shadow Broker. This seems to be canon, as if you didn't do the DLC, it's so that she hired a ton of mercs to help instead. Liara has a lot more power now, which means she can now feel like a valuable asset to the team, which was one thing that was bringing her down during that DLC. And she ends up using some of that power to create a backup plan. At some point later in the game, she'll come to Shepard's cabin with a gift. This box is a time capsule that she plans to make with the hope that if they fail, other civilizations will find it. It seems to have plans for the Crucible, as well as any knowledge they have gained on the Reapers up until this point. But Liara also wanted to add one more thing, which is a description of Shepard. We are the one who's made the most progress so far, so it makes sense that we're a part of the time capsule. Whatever you choose to say, though, ultimately doesn't matter, but this interaction is nice, as it shows that she's trying to consider all possible options. Clearly the end of the world is troubling her, but it doesn't seem to be the only thing troubling her. She seems to have a not-so-great relationship with her father. That, of course, being Matriarch Aethita, who we first met back on Ilium. We get a brief tease of this back in the lair of the Shadow Broker, where we can find a video of the Matriarch holding a picture of Liara, but that's about it. You can talk to her at the bar on the Citadel, and through some convincing can make Liara reconnect with her. Apparently she's been keeping tabs on Liara, and has even prevented a few hits on her. Besides that, though, we can find out that one of the Matriarch's parents, or Liara's grandparents, was a Krogan, which means that makes Liara a quarter Krogan. The rest of the dialogue isn't too important, but it is nice to hear what the two have to say as they catch up and chat.
I have never wanted to.
As for Tali, well, most of her time in between games was covered in the aftermath, which is that she left to go join the fleet, and then took up an admiral position since she's an expert on it. Not much has happened since then, so there isn't much to say, but there are two things I found rather interesting. Firstly, if you romance Tali, she'll give you a picture of herself with her mask off. This was changed in the Legendary Edition, and I'm definitely a fan of the change as it looks more authentic. The other, though, is after a future mission where we raid a place called Sanctuary. In that mission, we'll meet with Miranda and her father. After that mission, though, we'll find Tali drinking by the bar. Tali has decided to make a toast to Miranda because she was able to stand up to her father. The reason why no one is joining her is because this is something Tali struggles with. She spent a lot of her life trying to live up to him and doing what he wanted her to do. This connects to her loyalty mission, which is something I had mistakenly misinterpreted. I had originally thought that her thank you at the end of the scene was genuine, but according to some comments, it was actually supposed to be sarcastic. Thank you, by the way, for those that corrected me on this, because it makes way more sense when combined with this interaction.
They said it, but they were wrong. It's working. Why? What? Oh! Oh no! What can I do for you? Oh, did you need something? They said it, but they were wrong. It's working. Why? What? Oh! Oh no! What can I do for you? Oh, did you need something? They said it, but they were wrong. It's working. Why? What? Oh! Oh no!
About 7 years ago, a Unity talk changed the way that I think about scriptable objects as architecture. That was from Unite in 2017, where Ryan Hipple described at a high level how Shell Games was producing its latest games with SOAP. Today I want to walk through practical examples of refactoring a project to use SOAP for storing values and handling events. Then we'll talk about an extremely useful store asset made by a member of our own community that can make it a whole lot easier. Let's get started. Key feature of SOAP is the removal of direct dependencies between game objects in your scenes, and instead information is shared between them using assets in your project. In this case, that's scriptable objects. Let's set up a basic scene so we can demonstrate this concept. We can start with a simple controller. We can have a reference to an input reader and set some move speed, and let's cache a reference to our rigid body and also the input that we're getting from the input system. Await can be simple. We'll get the rigid body reference, and we'll use our input reader abstraction to enable our player actions and connect to our move event. When the event fires, we're just going to update our local move input. We can deregister for that event in onDisable. This input reader class is a scriptable object that we actually discussed a few weeks ago in a video about Unity's new input system. And while we're not going to explore it in depth in this video, it follows the same principles of scriptable object architecture. So I'll leave a link to that in the description. Finally, since I'm doing rigid body movement in fixed update, let's calculate what our movement should actually be, and we'll apply it to the character. Now, often we use singletons for managing the state of a game. So for example, maybe we have a score manager singleton.
I love how you did the exact same pattern I did.
And we could have a Unity action to fire whenever the score gets changed.
I'm like, I can either just make the instance the abstract type and then just cast it every single time I need it, or I can just fucking make the fucking generic.
Maybe a public method to add some points, which would also invoke the method. Maybe we can have one more public method here to get the current total. These kinds of singletons lead to a lot of direct dependencies inside of your game, and this is what we're going to eliminate in a little bit. One of those direct dependencies will be created by this score display class, which is just going to show the current score in the UI. Here we're going to need a reference to a UI document and also a label so we can show the score. In Awake, we can grab a reference to the UI document, and in onEnable, we can create a new label to display the score. I'll give it a really basic style, and let's attach it to the root visual element. Whenever the score changes, we're going to want to update our score display, and let's update it once as soon as it's enabled. For that, you can just output the word score and the actual value in onDisable. Let's make sure to deregister from the event. There's just one more class to make, and that's for collectibles. This is also going to have a direct dependency on our singleton. Let's have a configurable point value for any collectible, And on trigger enter, let's make sure that it's the player. If it is, let's update our score and destroy the collectible. Before we remove the singleton and refactor over to a scriptable object architecture, let's make sure that it works. I've already set up my collectibles and my player, but here on this new game object score manager, I'm going to drag on our singleton. You can see we've got a current score of 0. And if I grab my score display, I can drag on our score display component, and I'll also add a UI document that we can reference. Now we can just hit play. The little shiny objects are my collectibles, so I just grab one. You can see the score went up by 1, and now it's up to 2, working as expected. So what issue have we created here? In a simple game, maybe nothing. But as your project grows, direct dependencies mean that removing or changing one game object potentially requires a cascade of changes in other objects and your prefabs. We can break all of these hard references by using SOAP. Let's have a look. Instead of using a singleton to hold our score, let's create a scriptable object that I'll call int
I feel
variable.
like
We'll
-1
create an instance of this
definitely
in our project folder,
includes
and
not.
it's going to need to know its initial
Like
value
negation.
as well as its current value.
Not just a
We can create a
null,
Unity action
but
that we can
like,
fire anytime
I mean,
the value
I can
changes.
see a null
We have a public
being
property
a
here
valid
where we can get
included
the value,
as an
and we
argument
set the
into
value.
O-1.
First, let's have a guard
But
clause to not do anything if the value's not changing. But if it
I
is
feel like
changing,
you would
let's
still
set the value
need
and fire the
something
Unity
to
action.
operate
When
on.
using this, we
in
want to say
-1
more than
space.
just
Maybe
a reference to the
-2 space you
scriptable
can get rid
object.
of
I actually want to show the
operand,
value, so let's
but
create a property drawer. Inside the create property GUI method, let's create a new visual element to represent the container. We're going to
that
return
doesn't
that.
make sense either.
We're going to create an
Because-
object field, and I'll pass in the properties display name, and we can set the object type to be a type of int variable. Let's also create a value label for this. This one I'll just indent it a little bit from the left. We can add the object field and the label to the container, and then we're going
Useful.
to register a value
It's
changed
not
callback.
The
Here,
same
let's
as
pass the
bounded.
new value to an int
I want to make that
variable.
distinction.
If the new value is an int variable, let's update the label, and we'll register for future changes. So if the variable isn't null, let's display the current value, and let's update the label whenever this value changes. Otherwise, let's just clear the label. If there's an existing reference to an int variable, let's initialize the label with its value. If it's not null, let's display the current value, and let's also register for future updates to it as well. Just one thing I forgot up above, let's not forget that when creating our object field, let's bind it to the serialized property. Being able to represent values as scriptable objects is one of the foundational parts of scriptable object architecture. Let's see how we can use this to get away from our singleton. The first thing I'm going to do is remove this on trigger enter from our collectibles. You could go either way, but for the sake of this simple example, I'm going to relocate that logic over to the player controller. Instead, let's have a public property that just returns the point value. Over on our player, we'll keep track of our score using an int variable. We can add trigger logic and check to see if we've run into a collectible. If we have, let's add our points into our int variable and destroy the collectible. So our trigger logic no longer references the singleton. Let's do something similar over on our score display. Here we're also going to reference the int variable asset in our project. And if we jump down to the bottom of this class, first let's update our label to just output the value of our score variable. We can remove the references to our singleton, and instead we can just hook into the event that's on the score variable. Whenever it changes, let's update the score display. Now on our onDisable method, let's just deregister from the event. Now let's go back to Unity. First things first, let's remove our score manager singleton from the game. We won't be needing this anymore. Next, I've created a special folder here for variables. I'm going to create a new int variable. We'll just call it score. From here, we can set the initial value or the current value anytime, which is great for debugging. But let's connect this up in our game. Now, as our player picks up collectibles, it's going to want to update the score, and our score display is going to read values out of this score. Using our property drawer, we can see the current value of our score on the player or the score display game object anytime. So let's just make sure that it works. We can see the score updating in the HUD, and we can also see it updating on the score display component. Now this will work great in builds, but you might notice some strange behavior when you're still inside the editor, and that's because the score asset isn't going to update itself when you're coming in and out of play mode in the editor. You can see here, even though I've come out of play mode in my scriptable object, it still says I have 2 points. There's an easy fix for this. Let's go back to code. I'm going to make an abstract base class that all my scriptable variables can inherit from. It'll keep a static read-only list of instances. Whenever one of our scriptable objects is enabled, it'll add itself to the list. On disable, remove itself from the list. Then we can have a static method that will reset all of the instances. Here we can just iterate over all of them and call a method on each called onReset. That'll be an abstract method that each of our variables can implement. We'll make sure this fires by adding a runtime initialize onload attribute. Now in our int variable, we can inherit from runtime scriptable object, and all we have to do is implement the onReset method, which really should just set our current score to be whatever the initial value was. And we can do that while we're invoking the onValueChanged event. Let's do a quick sanity check. I've got all zeros in my score variable, so let's hit play. Picked up one of them, see the value went up to 1. If I come out of play mode and go back in, it should go back to 0. Now, obviously, you can do this with floats and strings and basically anything, even complex types. But let's move on to look at another pillar of SOAP, which is dealing with events through scriptable objects. Let's create for ourselves a simple event-driven health system. We need a max health and a current health, of course. We can use Unity events to fire when the health is changed and maybe when the player dies. On awake, let's make sure that our current health equals the max health. Whenever we take damage, let's subtract that damage from our current health and invoke our onHealthChanged method. If our current health ever goes to 0 or below, let's fire the onDeath event. We could also destroy this game object or have some other death sequence. We'll need a way to show this to the player, so let's have a new class health display. In order to connect to the health component's events, we're going to have a reference to it, and then we'll build something similar to our score display. We'll add another label to the UI document. So in awake, let's get a reference to the UI document, and in onEnable, let's create a new label to show our health, and we'll give it a style similar to the score. We can add our health label to the root visual element of our health document, and we can start listening for the onHealthChanged event. Whenever that happens, we'll update our label text. Let's make sure that we remove the listener on disable. Now we'll need one more class. I'm going to call it Damage Dealer. This will just inflict some damage on the player. So let's pick an amount, 20, on trigger enter. Let's try and grab the health component. If we can get it, let's apply some damage. Now back to Unity. Before we start refactoring to SOAP, let's make sure that this works. Let's add a health component to our player. And over on our score display, here I'll rename it to be HUD, and we can add the health display component to it. It's going to need a reference to the health component, so I'll drag the player in there. Finally, I have a dangerous area game object here. I'm going to add the damage dealer component to that one. Now let's just make sure that when I enter the dangerous area, I actually do take 20 points of health damage. So let's navigate over to this little tornado, and yeah, sure enough, it goes down to 80, and if I come out and go in again, same thing happens. So that's fine, but we have a tightly coupled reference between the player and the heads-up display. We can refactor to SOAP by having our health component publish an event, and we can add a listener to our heads-up display to listen to that scriptable object event. Let's create a new generic class, GameEvent. Game events are going to go hand in hand with a listener class. So let's define an interface for that. Just call it iGameEventListener of any type. Going to have one method, onEventRaised, which is going to listen for data of type T. Now back in our GameEvent class, we're going to keep a list of all of those event listeners. Whenever we want to raise an event with some data, let's iterate over all of the listeners backwards, and we'll call their onEventRaised method. Now the reason we're going to go backwards is it could be that one of the reactions of those listeners is to deregister itself or be destroyed. In either case, our list would be out of sync. Now, let's also have public methods so that our listeners can register themselves and deregister themselves. We might also want some game events that don't pass any data. To facilitate that, let's use the null object game programming pattern. I'm going to create a unit struct. This just has one property, default. The default value of unit is a simple instance of the struct itself with no initialization. Essentially, it's nothing, or a null object. So now we can make a game event that inherits from game event of type unit. When we go to raise one of these events, we can just pass in the null object. Now all we have to do is make a concrete version of a game event listener. If we come back over to our other file, I'll make a new model behavior, game event listener of type T. This is going to implement our generic interface as well. The listener will have a reference to the game event scriptable object that it's going to register with, and it'll also have a Unity event that'll define what it's going to do when an event is raised. On enable, we'll register this listener. On disable, we'll deregister. And when an event is raised, we're going to invoke our Unity event. We can make a non-generic game event listener as well. Now to handle our health, we actually need a game event of type float. So let's make a new float event, and that is going to need a float event listener, which is a game event listener of type float. Let's make sure we've got all our attributes for creating assets inside of Unity. And with that done, we can complete our refactor. If we come back to our health component, let's add a float event for on health change and a game event for on death. Now we don't need these two unity events anymore. Instead, what we'll do is inside of take damage, we'll raise our on health changed event. And if our current health gets to 0 or below, we'll raise our on death event. Let's also fire the on health changed event as soon as we awake. Now our health display doesn't have to be dependent on this health component at all. Instead, let's keep track of the amount of health that I want to display, and I'm going to set a boolean just to make sure that we've initialized everything before trying to set the text. We'll update the label to output the current health to 0 decimal places. Then in on enable, let's set initialize to true and call our update health display method. In on disable, let's set initialize to be false. Let's change our update health display to be a statement body method so that when we pass in the health, I can actually update our current health here locally. And as long as we've initialized this component and we have a health label, let's also update its text. Finally, let's change this to be a public method. Now, back to Unity. Over here, I'm going to create a new float event. I'll call it on health changed. Then I'll make a new game event and I'll call it on death. Once those two scriptable events are created, I can come over to the player and I can drag those references in here. And I can also come over to my heads-up display. Here, we can add a new float event listener. This is going to listen for our on health changed event. And I can connect it up to our health display. And we've made our update health display method public, so I can reference it here. At this point, we can also remove the reference to the player's health component and remove that direct dependency between the display and the player. Let's hit play and make sure that it's working. Now if I come over into the danger area, it should continue to drop my health by 20 points every time I go into it. And of course our score should also continue to work as expected. Now at this point we've covered the two foundational pillars of SOAP, which is using scriptable objects for events and using them as a value store. Now at this point you may be thinking to yourself, well, this seems like a lot of boilerplate that I'm going to have to write to implement this sort of architecture. Well, fear not, there is an asset on the asset store that can help you, and I've been a fan of it for many years now. In fact, I left a review for it way back in version 1. It's now on version 3.5, and the author of that asset is a member of our Discord community, and many of you have chatted with him about scriptable objects and scriptable object architecture before. Now, this asset goes on sale often, so if you're interested, I suggest going over to the store and putting it on your wish list. And while it's impossible to walk through every single feature of this asset, I want to walk through some of the ones that I think are the best. Let's bring it into the project. You can see right away that we get this helpful SOAP window that comes up that has references to documentation, Discord, and quick links to tutorial scenes here that demonstrate most of the functionality. There's also a YouTube channel with even more tutorials. If you close this window, you can always get it back from the window menu. Now, this solution supports scriptable variables similar to what we built in the beginning of this video, but it also supports scriptable collections. Let's start by having a look at scriptable lists. I'm going to jump right into this scriptable object that's containing the list. You can see here it has some extra features that we did not implement in our naive implementation. It has tags, descriptions. You can set when you want it to be reset, when the app starts, or on scene load, or even none for never reset. Let's take a look at the player spawner game object and see how it's being used in this scene. You can see it has a nice property drawer where we have some features and we'll be able to see the list as it gets populated. If I press play, let's see that in action. Here we'll get a button so that we can actually do some spawning. Every time I hit the spawn button, a new player gets instantiated into the scene and it adds itself into this list. This is extremely useful when you want to keep track of an entire collection of things like enemies or collectibles as you're creating them in your game. Why don't we look at how this is being done? The player spawner has reference to a scriptable list player. Let's click through that and see what it's all about. This concrete class inherits from a scriptable list of type player. That should look familiar by now. If we click through there, you see that inherits from a scriptable list base and implements a few interfaces. Primarily, it's using a list of type T to store all of these references. But on top of that, it has a ton of properties you can use and events that you can subscribe to. If we navigate through to the player class, we can see that in Awake, the player will try to add itself to the scriptable list. Every player keeps a reference to the list that it belongs to. On destroy, it will remove itself. You can see it has a public method for notifications as well, and that's because you can add a notifier that can send a message to every single object in the collection. Scriptable collections like lists have been part of this asset for a long time, but as of the most recent version, you now have access to a scriptable dictionary. You can make scriptable dictionaries of any types, and you'll be able to see all the key value pairs inside of the inspector, even at runtime. One great way to use this kind of key value store is with scriptable enums as your keys. Scriptable dictionary has several callbacks, and you can either make a dictionary using code, or you can use a really handy tool that comes with this asset. If I come up to the window menu here and we go under obvious game, you'll see that we have a SOAP type creator. This brings up a new tab where you can pick all of the general base classes to inherit from. If we choose dictionary, we'll get a little modal window. You can set the type of key that you want and the type of value, and then you can give your class a special name, select where you want to save it, and click create. Of course, you can use this tool to make any of the other types that come with the asset, including the scriptable save objects, enums, and event listeners. You can also manage all of your scriptable objects using the SOAP wizard. This will let you filter by tags. It has a search bar. You can also filter by type. Right-click on any SOAP scriptable object, and you're going to get a context menu with a whole bunch of other utilities. If I jump into play mode, you'll see that some of the buttons here that were grayed out are suddenly active, because now I can use this panel to actually raise any of my scriptable events. And this is great for debugging because you can see here as well, I can see all of my variables and everything right at a glance. Of course, I can filter here and do anything else that I want at runtime. Finally, I want to talk about one more new feature in this asset, and that is runtime injectors. So we're not going to go into too much detail here. I just want to briefly explain how it works. There are actually a few different ways you can inject variables, but basically you're going to give every variable that needs injection a special ID. You can see here in this runtime float variable injector, it's trying to inject two different variables. The first has an ID of HP and the other one is speed. The first one is using a template, which lets you set some default values for your variable. For example, maybe all of these variables need a default max HP. So where is this actually being injected? Well, let's expand the runtime injected health component. Here you can see it as a field waiting to receive an injected float variable. It also has a serialized float which defines its own max health. In code, this overwrites the defaults that come in from the template. Now the HP float variable is being injected in multiple places. In fact, if I expand this particular game object, it has a sprite underneath it, which is used for its health bar. This also receives an injected float variable from the injector. But how is this actually being done in code? Let's open it up. Without diving into a lot of details, and we've already covered a system similar to this on the channel, you can see there's an attribute here called runtime injectable, where it defines the ID of the thing that should be injected into this float variable. So I don't think it can get too much easier to use than that, to be honest. In fact, the reason I picked up this asset in the first place was because it already, back in version 1, had more features in it than I would have even had time to build myself. If you want to ask Pierre about his assets, you can ask him in the comments here, or you can jump onto our Discord, or you can join his Discord. I'll try and add a link in the description here. In the meantime, that's where we're going to wrap it up for another Sunday. Feel free to boost the algorithm by adding something in the comments section below, or hitting that like button. Consider hitting the subscribe button too if you're interested in exploring a new intermediate advanced game dev topic every week. Until then, I'll throw up another video on the screen, and maybe I'll see you there. Today we're going to take a look at a subscriber project that was beginning to go down the wrong path, and we're going to refactor it by applying abstraction and several programming patterns. This is the beginnings of a simple hack and slash game, but everything is tightly coupled and quickly turning into spaghetti. We want it to be loosely coupled so that we can have infinite weapon choices with minimal effort. So let's dive into this project before it becomes a mountain of technical debt and see how making better choices can prevent a nightmare. Let's have a quick look over this project before we get started. We can see in the UI there's the beginnings of some kind of toolbar. We can click the buttons, but nothing's happening. If I select the hero game object, we can see there's three components on it: a hero animation controller, and a weapon controller. If I select the weapons panel in the UI, we can see it also has a custom component on it with references to all three buttons and also a reference right back to the hero. On the surface, there's not too many problems, maybe one or two. The real problems here are in code. If we take a closer look at this weapon UI script that was on that panel, you can see that we've hard-coded references to each of those buttons, Each one is calling a unique method on the weapon controller. If we come over to the weapon controller class, we can see that there is a unique method for every single prefab that needs to be instantiated. So right away we can see this is going to be a problem if we wanted to extend this game at all. If we come and look at the scripts that were actually on those prefabs, there's a sword behavior, which is pretty minimal right now. There's also a bow behavior that looks very similar to the sword one, and a staff behavior that looks almost identical to the bow one. We can also see that each of these classes has a reference to an animation controller class that's calling a method that is specific to this prefab. It should be clear by now that we're going to have a lot of touch points if we wanted to extend this system at all. And on top of that, we have some behavior here for what happens when a spell is cast. We have another one for when an arrow is fired. Then we have a base hero class, which isn't doing very much. It just has a public take damage method. Then finally, we have this animation controller class, which has methods for every single trigger we might want to fire. One of the secrets to writing really good code is that you want your code to be able to easily adapt to change. You're going to want to change it, your producer's going to want to change it, your players are going to want you to change it. And right now, if you wanted to introduce a new weapon into this system, or if you wanted to just add even a variation of a weapon, you're going to have to touch all of those places and even more because you haven't even started using the weapons. Now the good news is we don't just throw this in the garbage. Instead, we start with key techniques. And the first one is look for repetition and eliminate it. More often than not, when you start to apply the dry principle, don't repeat yourself, it will often give way to patterns. Now, each of those weapon prefabs has a class on it that defines its behavior, but they all have a lot in common. Let's start there. Since they all share common functionality, let's start with an abstract base class. Call that weapon base, and I'm going to move it into its own file. Before I start implementing this class, I'm also going to define an interface, and this will be a contract that all weapons in our game are going to have to implement. Let's have an initialize method so that we can actually configure each of these weapons differently. We can have a method for when we equip the weapon, one for when we use the weapon, and one for when we unequip the weapon. Now let's have our abstract base class actually implement this interface. We can use Rider to implement all the missing members quickly here. Then up at the top, we can create members for storing any config information, so our weapon name and our damage. Then let's replace the contents of the initialize method so that we're actually setting those values. Then for now, in our equip method, let's just debug something. We can also do the same thing in the unequip method. So doing something special when we equip or unequip a weapon is optional, but every weapon should be usable. So let's make this an abstract method that every inheritor must implement. For now, I'll mark all of these other methods virtual so we can change them if we want to. Okay, now there's just some simple changes to make in all the behavior classes and everything will be in line. Start with the sword behavior. I'll inherit from weapon base, and then instead of the attack method, we're going to override the use method. Come over to the bow behavior class, we're going to do exactly the same thing. Replace mono behavior with weapon base, and instead of the shoot method, we'll again have the use method. Over in the staff behavior, exactly the same thing. We're just going to replace cast spell with override use. Now let's jump back over to our weapon base class. Here we're only passing in a string name and a float weapon damage. We're probably going to want a lot more information than that. Let's make a scriptable object that can hold information about any weapon we want to use. I'll call it weapon config. So here, of course, we can still have a name and we can still have a float for weapon damage. Up in the interface, we can change the signature of the initialize method to take in this weapon config instead of these other params. We'll need to reflect that change inside the base class. Now we don't need to store member variables for all the different configuration options. They'll all be encapsulated inside a reference to a weapon config. Let's set that in the initialize method. Then in these other methods, we'll just reference the weapon name through the config. Then let's just add an attribute so that we can create some of these scriptable objects inside of Unity, and then I'll move it into its own file. That'll be that. So at this point, we've only done a very small amount of work, but we've made the system quite a lot more powerful. In fact, we could add quite a bit more information to this weapon config. For example, why don't we have an enum to define a weapon type? We can store that inside the scriptable object. Maybe we could add a range, a reference to a prefab, maybe a reference to a sprite for use on our hotbars and inventories. We can add more information here in the future. So this refactoring we've been doing has led us to the point where we can now implement a programming pattern. So let's create a weapon factory. With a weapon factory in place, we're not going to need a unique method for every single item that we want to create in our game. Instead, we'll just have one method where we pass in a weapon config. Typically in a factory or a builder, it's a good practice to check the arguments coming in to make sure they're actually valid. Now, previously on this channel, we've made a class called preconditions, which will help us do that easily. I'm going to put that in place here. Now we can create a new instance of the weapon that we're trying to create. We can get a reference to its iWeapon component, and then we can pass in the config to its initialize method. Finally, we can just return the weapon instance. Now, we might as well put this into its own file. Now that we have a factory, we can do a major overhaul on the weapon UI and the weapon controller because we don't need individual methods for every single weapon in the game. Let's select almost everything here, and let's press delete. Now we'll create UI buttons on the fly as we need them. So let's have a transform we can keep them under called button container. And we'll have a prefab that will represent each of the actions. We'll have a list of each of these configs that we want to use so we can modify at runtime. So let's make a helper function here that will actually take one of these button prefabs and configure it the way we want. That'll take in a weapon config, we'll instantiate a new button under the container. We'll get its TextMesh Pro U GUI components so that we can set the text to be the name of the weapon. Then we can start listening to the onClick event where we'll call the weapon controller's equip weapon method and pass in the correct configuration. Then let's create a start method. All we're going to do here is iterate over all of the configs and create a button for each of them. That out of the way, let's go back to the weapon controller and do an overhaul there. Here, we're going to get rid of a lot of this code too because we don't need it anymore. Let's wipe out all of these methods. Let's also wipe out references to all of those prefabs that are contained in the configs. Instead, let's add a transform here for a mount point wherever we want to place that weapon on the character. Then we still need an equip weapon method. If we're equipping a new weapon, we can just get rid of the old one. Then we can call our weapon factory to create a new weapon, assign it as our current weapon, and we can actually just set its parent to be the mount point. Now, we probably don't need to create a new weapon factory every time we call equip weapon. Why don't we instead have a cached reference to that as a member, and we'll use that instead. Well, I think that's enough coding. We better get back into Unity and make sure this all actually works. So we do have a little bit of setup to do. First thing I'm going to do is create a new folder under my project folder called data. And inside of there, I'm going to make another one called weapons. So I'm going to put all my scriptable objects. Let's start just by making one. I'll make one for a sword. Let's fill in all the details we need to make sure it works. I'm going to need a prefab, and I'm going to need a name because that's going to go on the button. I'll give it some kind of default damage too for now. With those details filled in, we can take a look at our UI. And the first thing we're going to need over here is a prefab for all of our buttons. So I'm just going to take one of the buttons, drag it into my prefabs folder, and we'll use that as the basis for all the others. Actually, I think I'll flip over into 2D mode here just so that we can see what's going on the whole canvas quickly. Just press F to zoom in there a little bit. Okay. Actually, I'm just going to disable the entire rendering folder too so I can see it a little bit better. Now, we're just going to be using prefabs for spawning buttons now, so I'm going to delete the other two buttons. I'm going to add a horizontal layout group to this top panel, and maybe we can put a little bit of spacing in here. Now, maybe I should have left those other buttons so I can see how this will lay out, but you know what? I'll just take that sword prefab button and copy it and paste a couple times. So now, let's just adjust this a little bit here. I think I'll disable the child force expand. And maybe we can just move this around a little bit with some spacing from the left and maybe some spacing from the top too. And you know what? I think we probably don't even need that panel at all because maybe we don't need a background. So I'll just set it to 0, 0 for now. Let's come back out of 2D mode and F to zoom back in onto my hero. Let's go into game view and just make sure it looks, halfway decent. We can turn on my post-processing effects and beautify again. Now we do need some references in our weapon UI component. So let's drag our button prefab in there and also the container, which is actually itself. So maybe that's a little bit redundant. We don't need this final sword button anymore. Might as well kill that. Now, before I forget, let's jump over to the hero quickly because we needed to set that mount point. Now, I've already found it and I've bookmarked it in my favorites bar. So all I have to do is click it and we'll see it there. I can drag it onto the weapon controller as a reference. And I'm actually going to hide the sword that's already on the body there. Now, in order to actually spawn a new weapon, we need to have a reference to our scriptable object that we made somewhere. So back here on the weapon panel, let's add that into our list. Now later in our game, we can add that dynamically, but for now, we'll be able to test it out. So let's hit play, And there we go. I've got a button that says starter sword. If I click it, yeah, it does spawn a sword, but it looks kind of funny. Let's go back to scene view here and see what's going on. If I click the weapon mount again, and then I click on the sword, you can see it kind of spawned right in the middle of the player. If I reset the rotation, that
You
looks a
need
little
the
better, but I
fucking
think I'm
next
gonna have to
come
reset
alone.
the actual
I
position
don't need
as
a
well.
dog who is
If I
addicted to
click
fucking
reset on
nicotine.
position, we go back to 000, and that looks like it's right in the player's hand. Perfect. Okay, so that's something we can adjust inside of code as we're creating weapons. Let's jump back there. Before we do anything else, let's quickly fix that up. The next thing to fix up is the animation system, because that also had a method for every single weapon. So have a look. On the surface, this doesn't look too horrible. The main problem is that each weapon is going to have a hard-coded method call into this class. And if you add more weapon types, you're going to have to add more methods. Using triggers to switch between them is one option, or you can just play animations as you need them. So let's wipe out this existing code, and the first thing I'm going to do is create an animation hash that represents my idle state. In Unity, an animation hash is an integer value that represents an animation state. It can also represent a parameter name. Then I'll add a countdown timer so I can keep track of how long the new animation has been playing. I'll also set a crossfade time here, how long it takes to fade from one animation to the next. Then let's have two public methods. One will play an animation if we want to play it by its name. The other one will play it by its hash. And we can just have the one that's playing by the string name actually convert it to the hash and call the other method. We'll also need a helper method so that we can figure out how long an animation is on the fly. To do that, we're going to need access to the animator's runtime animator controller. We can loop over all of the animation clips, and we can figure out which one is the one we're looking for, and then we'll return clip.length. If we can't find that, we'll just return 0. Now, if we come back up to our play animation method, we can set a timer for the length of the animation minus our crossfade time when we start the time. About 7 years ago, a Unity talk changed the way that I think about scriptable objects as architecture. Years ago, Unity talk the way that I think where using its useful key feature of SOAP and in them using your project objects instead of a basic. And also input reader. I'll leave a link. we use single. These kinds of single to we're going to for display. Changes with once is dependency on singleton. Point value for any collection and on and destroy. Or we remove the singleton. Layer, but here on this manager, or display. You can see this. You have a create. In a simple game, maybe not. Dependencies mean moving or changing one game object. You create that. Current value. Do anything. But if it is changing, let's value and fire. When using this, we want to see more object action. The value, so let's GUI method, let's create an object in the container. Object field and name, and we can set the object type to variable. It's also a value label. So I'll just indent it a little bit from the left. So and the link to the container, and then here let's pass the new value to an int variable. Use an int variable, let's update the link. So if the variable isn't null, value, then let's update the label whenever this value changes. Otherwise, let's just clear the label. If it's existing variable, initialize the label with its null or current value, and let's also purchase it as well, which is creating our object. It's a serialized property. Being able to represent views as scriptable objects is one of the foundational parts of scriptable architecture. See how we can use this. What I'm going to do is remove this. Go either way, but for the sake of this example, I'm going to relocate that object over to square control. Player will keep track of trigger logic into a collection. We have add our point to each variable. On our play. Here we're also in reference to with this class. First, we will just was the value of our source. And set this on display on disable method. Let's just deregister from the event. First things first, let's remove our core manager singleton from initial value or the current value. Let's connect this up in the game. Here's a score. Play is going to be using my property value according to the game. Did it work? See the score. Great and builds, but you might have strange behavior when you're still inside the score asset isn't been activated. Can return another play here, even though part of play mode. Object elements which are variables and inherit from, so it's static. You list it when an object is enabled, it's disabled. Then we can have all of these, all of them, and call a method reset. Make sure that's fired. Non-initialized. Int variable. Sometimes switch to object. Reset method. Reset our power. Let's do a quick sanity check. All zeros or variable. Out of play mode. Now, obviously, we do this with floats and strings and one look at it. Just dealing with. Let's create for ourselves a driven max health and current health. In the event, change the medium. Make sure that our current health, whenever we take change the current health goes to zero. Below, what we want. We could also destroy this object. Need a way to show. In order to connect the health components event to it, and we'll build something similar to our sport with a label to the await with the UI doc. Let's create a new label to show file sim. So it goes to on. Who's the listener? One more class. Click some damage. Now 20. Unity. We start refactoring. Let's make that help people slash player. Here I'll rename it to be play component. And then use reference to the help. Drag the player in there. Finally, dangerous area. Make sure that your area I actually take it over to this tornado and fine, but we reference player and we can refactor an event listener. Get a new generic events hand in hand with interface is called ID. Yeah. Now, game with raising tempo. Listening. Methods so register them. Also wants to do any data. It just has two default. Unit an event that is a unit is one of these events. Then no. Now all we have to do is navigate. Community event will define what it's going to do when
Just gonna post a sweater. It's the ultimate showdown, ultimate destiny. Good guys, bad guys, and explosions. As far as the eye can see. I don't know why I remember that. And only one will survive. I wonder who it will be. Mr. Rogers in a bloodstained sweater.
component event for current health or below. At all. I'm going to set a boolean just to enable, but you can call enable display to be statement body when we pass it. Let's change. We're going to create a new palette on foundational pillar. Seems like a lot of not there is view for it. Logged in, so every single feature. In Discord links to cleaning the list. You'd want it. Even none for look at the play. Action button. Extremely useful. That and see Ways you can use. When part of this make scriptable key values. Come up to the want and save it and make any of being the script enums and manage all mode. You'll see to actually raise any rate or new feature injector. We explain different ways you can inject a special different variable. Use for your where is this actually being injected? The runtime. Leave and inject. Max out. Being injected. Receives an a lot of details. Of the thing that should be. You can get too much easier to use. And that's what we're going to write today. Feel free to comment section below. And subscribe.
Very own video. Last year, totally worked. Went from me, it was about him, and then when the tutorial was over, community from the install, you need to make a community. Oh, okay. New configuration. Okay. You can also just drag and drop files from elsewhere. And current, not by making object is a with third
will look like when art by default. Marquee lists all components up when physics objects being outlined. We make the line loaded. In C sharp, that's the worried about right now is the art. Art is for update run file the script. Fire off every line of code. Same thing we're going to numbers and the components. I'll begin some example. Finally, in the we go back to command by command. Write some code, velocity to the bird to make it 2D. Advanced. Class name new number. I'm going to multiply line up in scale. Like I said before, but again, well, right. R has been community. Flow and update code. Community. Worrying about. All the games. Communication. Continuously. Communities expect. On games. Out of pipes. Up to score. with them at once. Of the bird. -1. Load the bird. Start by creating move speed. Oh, and this time engine. Right. Left. Move speed. Number line. See the problem. Food and update. 1,000. Right, PlayStation. It's on different computers. Well, two.
Are you serious right now, bro?
By time. Leave it for the as we will. Spawn new object from the hierarchy. For a game object. New game object. Going to write some. Start by making object. Unity will use the same drag. Instead of a component, we'll drag the prefab. A nice build. In here, different follow script. It will create an object at a specified position and rotate. Object. Let's just use transform. So again, it's the same. Oh, that's not spawning where united into by number of code and then start make a couple. The timer computers friendly. And actually boxes navigate the side of it. Condition isn't met. Skip the code and do the code in else. So 0. Now every frame asks if the timer up. If it's not, i.e. the timer has actually exceeded the spawn rate, like it's an easy one. The only problem is we have to wait ages. But the same or even similar of the final. There. Now we can just write option bring in. A position
For as long as there have been video games, in ammo counters are entirely glamorous bullets you've got. Shooters. As to be nearly invisible. But some are more interesting than others, and over the years the predominant way of displaying them. They needn't be boring. It can be quite in your face. And sometimes you don't need one. In 1975, years before Space Invaders, Taito and Midway on an old electromechanical Sega posing its film. It might be feature an ammo 1v1 combat. Boys counter is at the graphic resolution of each player. Do 6 items. Moving stage code. Move, shoot, and what I like about gun is that your matters. Only 6 rounds, no reloads, or is empty. Win. Players can tell that one of them is fine. The other has a finite number of chances to win. It's the whole rationale behind having
Most modern games, nearly as well. Of this era didn't count your shots. Remaining supply of sniper icons. 84's Night Gunner. See, that's really nice. You play as a turret gunner. Counters with machine. Hammer counter is 3-row pictogram. Bracket ammunition. Readable at a glance. Works thematically. In the turret, and you can see the belt of ammunition getting shorter as you. Missions there are. Missile strikes, and the ammo counter changes to reflect the different. Mission. Pictographic. 1984's Duck Hunt, a 3-round display. 1985 Revolvers. Thematically perfect. Personality. Below. It is every case. Works for smaller cases, but for larger counts, and occupying. Readability benefit. Numerical count. Nine. Things like roll. Simple bullet count. It indicates how to implement it. It even works for multiple weapons. And yet it doesn't. Numbers on this became more common. Well, first, perhaps the Uzi shaped gun controller, and its gameplay was magazine count. Brief pause. Counter tracks both the magazine, number of magazines. So, magazines are represented. Numerical mag count. Large size. Here also had a novel approach. Quantities. These are unlimited. Missiles. String. Other than showing icons, then uses a unit vector. Large missile. Count at a glance. Generic display. Towards the end. 90s. Morphic. Counters that resemble the operating firearm. Simple as pretty. Bullet icons. More ornate. So 7 still is in the top right. ET92 is rendered. Beneath is a representation of your current magazine. Remaining stack of bullets visible. Fire. Off to the right. Interesting. It's a nice bit of detail. I applaud the effort. A usable ammo counter. Prove it's a little good.
What the fuck does that mean? Gauche.
Which devotes the sides of the screen. Multiple ammo. On the left is your magazine. On the right.
I even spelled it wrong. G-A-U-C-H-E, not G-O-C-H-E. Lacking social experience or grace, crudely made or done. Okay. Yeah, okay, I can see that.
Gun games like Lethal Forces had a reloading mechanic, knowing how many rounds you had. And because of a large, showy, animated counter, it wasn't too distracting. Particularly
I love how I needed to look up Gershwin, that's skeuomorphism.
Sleepily line up when you and peasants fly convincingly with fire. The excitement of the arcade. Cinematic violence was very vogue in the early. And their contributions. In 1990, as innovative. Even reflect. Everything else? Numbers. Which we can throw in a silhouette of you're getting. Was the same. Just a number. Most of the clone new genre packed with people don't care about shiny 3D graphics. That is a necessary. Overthink it. Number on the bottom. Most part, that's it. Exceptions. Really good game. End of the. How do you know how much ammo you have left? Health is indicated by bloody edit. The gun. Brilliant. Another highlight of the in Doom Cloak. World building and no counterfront. Being a very fun. Like Doom. Real heads up. For instance, we find an weight weapon collapse. But it's honest. My words. For the most part, yes games. Number on the pool of ammunition per weapon with makes pretty much a hallmark. Changing and in the name of realism. Was that already flirted with at the end of the 90s? Bond Doom. Seven was taken with charm. A more realistic approach was and lever action reloaded round. Now there's an old bullet icon on is there and popping back. It's perfect. Functional point. Reserve into important game that prompted Us magazine. Uses good way of doing what it needs to. And that's probably why numerical counters in reserves not a lot has with ammo count. Really, you want to know how many bullets you've got. You have to pull out the magazine. In the realm of science fiction, firearm itself. Red LED 8 of the gun. How many rounds remain? Neat detail in the universe. Highly believable convenience. By the bowl. My shooter, 7. Nice pictogram. For each weapon with numerical result. Implementation. And over. Assault rifle. What would otherwise be a bad all glued. The counter is gun. Millions. Measure. Memorable touch. Usable piece of line. The fact that it's not universal for all weapons makes the assault in its own way. Hitler has its own ammo counters. Once protruding